Recording is on.
Excellent.
You're live.
Okay, it is September 16th at 9:02. We'll start the meeting. First on our agenda is just quick roll call. We have all board members present. Everyone is accountable. I don't think I need to read off the names. First thing we'll take up is agenda change request and vote to approve the agenda. I have one addition that I'd like to add is the COVID attestation. In our emails, we received a notice to fill out a COVID attestation, this group. I don't know if we have to or not, but we'll add this to the agenda for discussion. The other thing that we'd like to talk about is where to insert Vicuda. Will is here to present from Vicuda today. We had talked about last meeting having him do a presentation. I would propose we move it in just before the break, somewhere between 9:40 and 10:40, if that's amenable. And what I'd like to do is the COVID attestation just after the minutes. COVID here. The other change to the agenda is approval of the minutes from 8/26. Holly has reviewed those, but sent those pretty late last night around 11 p.m. And I haven't had a chance to review them, and I'm assuming nobody else has. So we will take these off the agenda today for approval and just look at the September 9th meeting minutes. All right, are there any other changes to the agenda, Laura?
Just a question about executive session items and whether or not those can be moved either to the front or the back, just for the folks that are on with us virtually. If they can be, I'd prefer that we do that.
Okay,
And then,
yeah, happy to do that. We'll move those after public input,
and then
unless we have time before public input. Does that make sense?
Say that again?
If we can move those after public input,
Yes, that's what I would-
unless we have time before, if we're like, we've completed all our business, then we'll take them up.
Yeah.
Because we may go through,
Or
I'd like to hold the public input at noon or earlier if we have the capability to do so. So if we have some dead time in between public input,
we'll do.
then we'll take up the executive
Okay.
session. But
Yes, that's what I'm thinking is.
But so for anybody that's on the phone, public input will be at noon or slightly before if we get through all the business. So just, stay tuned on the video or however you're participating virtually.
I have a 12:15 hard stop.
Okay.
I do too, I have to leave.
Okay. We will get through this fairly quickly.
The other item, Patty, is I just want to make sure that we talk briefly about where we are at with staffing.
Okay.
So, support for this team here is really important to understand where we're at. And I don't know where you'd like to put that, but
Let's put that right after COVID.
okay. Thank you.
2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Any other discussion on the agenda changes? Motion to approve. Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from September 9th, 2021. Any discussion? So we're going to not take up the 8:26 minutes because Holly just did an edit of those and sent those out at 11 o'clock last night. And I just haven't had time to review. I was sleeping. So if there's no discussion changes, I'll take a motion to approve the September 9th, 21 minutes.
So I have that one feedback point. Does this matter?
Yes, it matters.
Yeah, but make it formally and I'll.
Edit the minutes, because maybe the minutes reflect the discussion. I'm just trying to make the point that our vocabulary matters and we try to get out of talking about multiple sources of baseline, because we've all agreed there's going to be one.
So where are you on the agenda? I want to make sure captions change.
In the minutes.
In the
The
minutes.
minutes, I'm sorry. the minutes.
Page 2.
Page 2. And you want the paginated too, I got that.
Yeah, so my feedback was, what was it?
Yeah, it's right here, it's printed out, and I don't know how we,
Yeah, so when you make the motion to the minutes, make the motion with these amendments, and then you can approve them with the amendments and we'll make the corrections.
Does it work to do that? Is it actually
If the,
translatable?
yeah, well, if the minutes are accurate of the discussion, and I frankly don't recall it, I'm only reacting to what I saw on the page. If the minutes are accurate of the discussion, then let's leave it.
Mhm.
My point is simply going forward, it's not going to help us to have multiple references to multiple baselines when we've agreed we're going to have one baseline.
Right.
So I want to tighten up that vocabulary. And I don't know if that needs to be, maybe that should be reflected in these minutes and not last minute.
I have a problem with how we're doing minutes because they are not reflecting consensus that's reached. Now, we're stopping short of actually voting on some sort of decision, but there's consensus reached. And I saw this on the August 26 minutes as well. And then we talk more generally. And I think it's because we're asking somebody to both participate in the meeting and take the minutes. And, you know, I listened to the whole 4 hours and trying to, my only point is, I think this is such an important point that we might want to amend the minutes, like literally amend the minutes.
Yeah, I don't care the mechanism as long as we.
Yeah, and I should say, the one thing to do, and it's common with boards, is, don't hesitate to make motions. Motions really do lock things in. So, you make a formal motion, that becomes very clear. For, you talk about when you come to consensus, you can close that consensus
Yeah,
with a motion.
let's not go down a rabbit hole.
Exactly,
My point-
exactly.
I think my point is clear, right? So let's just do this if we can. I'm fine leaving the 9 minutes as they are, as long as the 9:16 minutes reflect the sentiment that referencing PSD data, VCBB data, and CUD data, we're going to work hard to just reference PSD as the baseline data, because that's the source of truth we've all agreed we're going to work off of. And again, if somebody doesn't agree with that point, I think we've all agreed to that point and we're past that.
Well,
If we're
Yeah,
not-
I'm not sure I agree, so let's finish the discussion.
Well,
Yeah.
it's about the board members agreeing.
I know, but I'm just saying there may be, I want to provide you, I need some clarity on that. Because what we've been asked, what we plan on doing is updating what we're going to be providing metrics, measurable metrics on a
Yes.
weekly basis.
Off-
That's not going to come from the department.
No, I'm just talking, where are those metrics going to be derived from? What data source are those metrics going to be derived from? It's the PSD.
Yeah, we can't, they only update their database annually. So we're going to have to constantly be updating our own database.
Yeah, but the baseline, you draw a line in the sand, you say, we start from here.
Yeah.
And that baseline data is from the PSD data set.
That's right,
Period.
annually changed.
That's all that's all it is. You are going to update that data going forward. And it's relative to the baseline set back here. So as we make progress on things, database is updated and you measure the difference between here and here. And the
Measuring
baseline,
change
Yeah,
against
let me
the
be-
baseline.
let me be clear.
I
wanna be clear before you-
Those
go ahead.
updates are going, they're not going to a separate database, right? They're
Right.
going into the PSD.
Exactly.
Baseline, right?
Exactly.
So the
No.
baseline-
Or not.
So are we talking? 'cause this is-
This is a problem. We have talked about this on 8/26,
So are we-
9/2, 9/9.
And
now
apparently I
9/16.
didn't understand the
It's okay,
conversation.
So are you imagining that the VCBB will maintain a separate GIS database from what the PSD baseline is?
Let me attempt this.
Sure.
So the PSD data is the baseline data updated yearly. As new projects are built, we are going to be tracking those. But the official broadband availability data is going to remain the Public Service Department data. We need to track it as it goes for reporting purposes as things get built with each project.
Great. So where will you be tracking those changes?
In our own database.
Yeah, the projects that are approved and built will be in a different database so we can have disclosure on what's happening in between those reporting periods.
And when we say database, are we talking about a GIS data set?
I believe we're talking about GIS data set and a map so rather than having to wait till October of each year, you have an idea of what's been built and funded with public dollars during that previous year.
Right.
It'll all be,
Right.
yeah.
So is there any reason those changes can't be simply performed by the VCBB GIS resource in the PSD GIS data set so that it's all in one place.
Well, it's going to be using the same data set. I think the department, I don't think the department's going to go for it. I think they wanted to keep doing their yearly updates since we're not going to have data that shows every single project happening in the state. We're only going to have data showing the publicly funded projects. So it's wanting.
Yes, that was going to be my question.
Do
So
you have this funny feeling like I do?
I do, I think it needs, well, I don't understand why they wouldn't. It's merely a layer
Yes.
and a data set.
Yes.
And to create this somewhere else, I just don't understand why they wouldn't.
And,
Well, we're gonna
and
be
the
using-
statute requires the agencies of the state to cooperate with us.
Well, we're going to be using the E911 data, and maybe that is the solution, that we have a separate data. We have a separate layer showing what's been built in the last year, and then it is all aligned afterwards. I think that's what I'm saying. And I know Clay is on the call, and Corey might be. I'm confident they would have some feedback on our logistical questions.
So could I make a suggestion? Rather than ruin our agenda with this discussion point, can we take this on in a subsequent meeting and nail it? Because this is going to take a little bit of time. This is not a simple discussion. And the fact that we've gotten this far and we're not on the same page concerns me.
I move that we adopt the minutes with the addendum of the Brian Otley September 15th email as an appendix.
I'll second that.
All right.
I haven't called the vote.
Aye.
Hold on, I haven't called the vote yet.
Okay.
And I actually have a comment, I'm sure.
Hold on. So the proposal is to take Brian's email as an appendix to the minutes. I'm not sure that makes sense to me.
Different email.
This one that says, feedback on the minutes from the
Sure.
last meeting. Can we begin numbering pages?
Mhm.
Number 2, the first full paragraph of page 2 regarding baseline data. The way this is written, it talks about PSD data, VCBB data, and CUD data. This is not accurate. There is PSD data, and that is the data we've all agreed will be used, et cetera, et cetera.
You know that, right?
Yeah, I got it. I'm not. I think this is a future item to discuss. I'm not sure it makes sense to correct the minutes because I think we did talk about, we did go back and forth at the September 9th meeting. I think it's an item for us to discuss so we can get all on the same page. I think that what we talked about at the last meeting, it sounds like Christine had one interpretation, Brian had another. I'm not certain that the minutes are incorrect based on this discussion that just happened. So rather than addendum to the states, we didn't talk about it. I think that we did talk about what's in the minutes. But I think we do need to put this on for a future agenda item to clarify.
I think you're right. Withdraw my second.
Fine. I withdraw the motion.
Okay,
I still have my comment.
okay, go ahead.
So, if we are maintaining a data pool, a data set, and the department is maintaining a data set, the department is going to be changing theirs, right? Just to be clear, with private builds from private providers. And we would be
Consolidated
changing.
repair points.
Yeah, and we would be changing with CUD, and that does not make sense. I mean, I think the layer aspect.
You're saying it's all gonna be in one place.
I think so,
I
yeah,
agree with you.
yes, I
I
think
agree
so,
with you.
yeah. But we
But we're
also, I
gonna have our
also,
own
But we're gonna have this
we have
discussion.
our own layer.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's have this discussion as a separate agenda item. And maybe, can we look at the data so we can get a better handle on that? Can we pull up the data?
Certainly pull up the data. The new data, I believe, is going to be released in October. And as I said, I know we have Corey and Clay participating. They might be able to provide.
Yeah,
us a little bit more.
I don't want to get into this right now as an
Okay.
agenda item, but we're going to put it on for a future meeting to discuss in more detail. So then the folks at the DPS can be ready to talk about it. And it may help to put the data up so we can actually see what we're talking about. But we'll definitely, future agenda, I have it listed as first item for future agendas. Okay, with that, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
Moved.
Okay,
Second.
all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are passed. First, next item on our agenda is the addition of the COVID attestation. We received an email, at least I received an email asking for us to all sign something. I tried to click on the links, nothing happened. So I would like to just tee this up as a discussion item to see, put it on Christine, your list to see, do we have to fill that out?
You do not have to fill that out. The reason you got that is because that was distributed to the state email system and you're an exception.
Okay. Thank you. That's easy. No. The next item on the agenda is a staffing update. I'll turn that over to Christine.
The jobs are being posted next week. It's the state system's a little complex, so Carol had to do a lot of work. If you post a different job position than one's in the existing database, it takes about a month to get approved. So Carol had to spend some time trying to figure out how to fit the jobs we're looking for into existing classifications. So
Carol.
Carol is the human resource support from the Public Service Department. So if you look at timeline, there's a requirement for the administrative assistant to be posted for 14 days before you can hire. So it'll be probably a month before we get our administrative assistant. The others we can start hiring as soon as we can start interviewing as soon as it gets posted. So those postings will go up next week.
So, Madam Chair, I have concerns about the workload that is on these folks, the expectation, our needs of these folks, the CUD's needs. And so, I'm looking for some alternative strategies. Are there things that, I noted there was some discussion about work groups outside. We had reserved a day for doing work. I think it was the 28th or something. I would really like to hear from you all, ways that we could, I can give a few more hours, on that day, or, how can we offload some work to make sure that we're doing the detail that is necessary and also, continuing to move the ball forward and not cooking you guys, so I don't know how to deal with it, but I'm really concerned about this, actually.
Christine, do you have an update from just your perspective right now with you and Rob, how it's going?
We've been scrambling for search. Sure, I keep coaching Rob, because he has family, and so I know it's been stressful for you, Rob. I think the fact that we're moving the meetings to every 2 weeks will help a lot, because we spend a lot of time, we, the two of us. We're scrambling, but I do appreciate your suggestion, and we could use some help. And I'll work with Rob to come up with a list. And also, the state systems are much more cumbersome than I've ever dreamed of. This morning I finally got this, for example, getting a GIS resource, you have to go through the Agency of Digital Services, and they have this very complex statement of work, RFP, that I just ran into a roadblock that I just found out this morning I didn't need to fill it out. So I've got help on that now. But it just takes, the systems are they're a lot more complicated than in the private sector. Put it that way.
In terms of working groups of things that would take a little bit of the pressure off of us and help move things along faster is we are starting to receive pre-construction grant applications. I would love to have a board member involved in the scoring, both for best practice and accountability, and also just for someone else to take an eye on that, since we're doing so much at the moment. That would be one suggestion. Another suggestion would be is we may be able to, I think I mentioned this at a previous meeting, this goes back to actually minute taking. There's a service that'll do the minute taking, that'll do a video and provide all those things. That would take some administrative burden off of us. And I believe this is the state, so who knows? It could be within the micro purchasing threshold, and I don't know if it would have to go through ADS, but that would be something I would love
get that service very reasonably, like for a month even.
Are we able to make a motion to authorize that or no?
So I'm with you,
Yeah,
but if it's going to take a month to get a month's service?
No.
No, we should. No, I think That's, Rob and I were talking about this.
All right,
This is
let's-
exactly- We need that right away.
Friendly motion to pursue it and explore it. If it makes sense.
So what are we talking about, like, because as soon as you said that, what popped in my head is just get a court steno that, like, the PUC uses, who could just transcribe the meeting.
I think that would, given that it would be a state
whole
position, that's a whole other can of worms to try to do. Yeah.
Short
The
contract.
thing, since I have been on the EC Fiber board and they do use that service you're talking about, the thing that makes that work is somebody sits down and goes through it though. I mean,
Afterwards.
yeah,
Okay.
because they're transcribing something it's just all words
Just
to
gotta
them.
clean it up, right?
So there's still workload.
So,
Still some more, so it's just
so
not
would you
that.
like a motion?
Yes.
Okay, so I move that we authorize staff to explore and if possible, move forward with securing minute-taking service, transcription
And
service.
general admin support.
And general admin support.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Any opposed?
thank you.
So going back to the working group side of things, we can talk offline or someone can volunteer right now. Is there anybody who's willing and able to help with doing the basic scoring of the applications? The board itself will have to vote to approve the applications, but someone that's going in a bit deeper and a bit earlier.
How much time do you think that would chew
Yeah, how
up?
many have you gotten in so far?
We've only had one so far. I expect another possibly up to 3 by next Tuesday.
How long does it take you to get through one to score it? So just based on the one,
I haven't scored it yet.
okay.
Yeah, I haven't scored it yet.
Before you answer that, I want to throw in another request too, so.
Yeah, we've asked for a lot of information and I want to make sure that we read it and absorb it. And
Exactly.
I encourage you all to read the applications regardless of whether you're doing a working group or not. But
But should it be the same eye that is scoring all of them as opposed to,
Consistency.
right? And if that's the case, then I think I would not offer because my husband is a member of a CUD.
Yeah, and before you make a decision on this one, because I'm kind of looking at you and Brian for specific help on developing the design guidelines. We had the meeting yesterday. I'll update you on that, but certainly I'm looking for some expertise in helping with those design guidelines.
I'll go through and score. I can be a scorer. I mean, I have big questions about the scoring format, but it's just out of like, really, does this work? But yeah, as long as we're, as long as we
Holly-
train so that we're
Yeah.
consistent.
Yeah,
is what
and
I
Holly,
guess.
I would encourage you to take it as a board role assignment versus going into the weeds of evaluating
I'm
this.
not
Yeah,
gonna-
I just,
Make any comments outside this room that changes or addresses process.
is that way you're following what is the
Yes.
matrix and the rules of what already been set up.
Yes.
So rather than go in and say, oh, let's
I'm
change
clear.
that, or yes, you got it. Okay. Happy to have you take that.
I
role.
know I have
Thank you,
editoritis.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Thank my husband.
Have another set of eyes on these, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the grant scoring question. But
Yeah, and maybe after I do the output on the design workshop yesterday, you'll understand more about what my request is.
Christine, I would volunteer to help in that.
That'd be great.
So
I
you,
do reserve
Dan, you're
the-
also going to do the scoring too?
No, this is a different request, engineering.
Design.
Sorry.
Engineering design support.
I think that's the right, Dan would be best
Yeah,
position for that, I agree.
Okay.
And I would ask that we remember with design, that it is not a statewide fiber design that we are obligated to do, but, we are not obligated to required to do that.
Yeah, but we are trying to make it an interconnected system.
Yes, which we have now with
So I
all
think-
of our different telecommunications providers.
So I think best practices would be something that would.
Best
Yes,
practice,
yes,
exactly.
yes.
Good
Thank you,
job.
Dan.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan.
Is there anything else on staffing to discuss? Hearing nothing, we are going to move to a next agenda item, which is Rdof discussion with Clay Purvis and Corey Chase. turn that over to you to team up.
Sure, I actually, I'll just turn it right over to Clay and Corey.
Great. Thank you for having us. My name is Clay Purvis. I'm the director for telecommunications and connectivity with the Department of Public Service. And with me is Corey Chase. You all asked Corey to give a little update or presentation on Rdof. We have prepared a small presentation, and I'm hoping that we can keep this somewhat informal and just have a nice discussion about Rdof. And hopefully we can answer any questions you have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Corey.
Hello, everyone. So I think I can present. I'm not sure. Is that working? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'll try to be brief, and we can talk if you have more questions. So the Rdof is the Rural Digital Opportunities Fund. It's a program of the FCC. So I think it's important to start with a little bit of history about what the FCC has done with universal service. So for context, this map shows the incumbent local exchange carrier territories. These are not town boundaries, these are wire center boundaries. All of the way the telephone companies built their networks, all locations in a wire center boundary are served by a single central office. And these wire centers are operated by different companies, but there's two main distinctions. You have the RBOC, the Regional Bell Operating Company, which in Vermont, the legacy RBOC is consolidated to CCI. They have approximately 84% of the locations in the state. And then you have the RLECs, the Rural Local Exchange Carriers, and they have approximately 16% of the locations in the state. So in this map, light green is the consolidated territory, and blue is the various RLEC territories. So the RLECs include.
Where your screen isn't showing right now. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why, because I'm seeing it on my screen here, but it's not showing in Giga.
It was.
And it was.
I clicked something that said exit spotlight. I thought that was taking my video out of the picture.
Well, I'll kick you out of Spotlight, Clay. Actually, you already did. But Corey is spotlighted and should be able to share his screen right now, and
Yeah,
so
I can see it on my end. So
you can.
Yeah,
That's strange. Maybe it is something on our side in the room, which is there. It is. There it is. I don't know.
So Rod, just for a few minutes, could you mute your microphone?
Certainly.
Not your microphone, the Giga microphone. Does that okay? Come back, unmute and let me know if you stop seeing the screen. And I'll be brief, and then we can come back for questions. So I was saying that the territory in Vermont, the most of the territory is the Regional Bell Operating Company legacy territory, which is consolidated, and the blue shows the rural local exchange carriers. That includes VTEL, Waitsfield, Franklin, Shoreham, and TDS. So, brief history of the Federal Universal Service Fund. The Federal Universal Service Fund was created to ensure that the telephone companies could provide telephone service to everyone, with the understanding that it's more expensive to provide service in rural areas than in urban areas. And so they were given money. The FCC provided a system to give funds to the incumbent telephone companies to support service in rural areas. There are different approaches for the RBOC, the Regional Bell Operating Company in Vermont, consolidated, and the RLECs. And That's beyond the scope of this discussion, but it's important to note that there are different approaches that the FCC has employed to provide that support. A significant change happened with the transformation order and the Connect America Fund. So the Connect America Fund had two phases. The first phase was to give to kind of shift the way that they had been doing funding to support only voice service and change to supporting voice and broadband. That, as an aside, was a very complicated thing to do because the federal language supporting the idea of using Universal Service Fund it was directed for telecommunication service, and the idea of using money for telecommunications services to support broadband was a little bit complicated because broadband, as you know, is not a telecommunication service, or many claim that it's an information service. And that is a different category of service. At any rate, the Connect America Fund provided $8 million a year to Consolidated over 6 years, and they were required to deploy service. They were required to continue to offer universal voice service to all their locations, and they were required to deploy. I'm getting a lot of feedback. They were required to deploy for DSL service to a specific quantity of locations. The new phase that we're talking about now of Federal Universal Service Fund is the next iteration after the Connect America Fund. This new phase of federal funds, federal approach, is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, Rdof. So Rdof phase 1 was for one set of areas, essentially completely unserved areas, and Rdof phase 2 will be coming eventually to serve other parts of the consolidated territory. So going back to what I mentioned before, CAF phase 1 was part of the transformation order about 8 years ago. This was the territory that the FCC was worried about, and to identify this territory, the FCC took the entirety of consolidated territory. So I'm going to flip back for a second to show you that again. So all of this green territory is consolidated. From all of this green territory, they selected the areas that are in the blue here for their Connect America Fund program. The Connect America Fund program, they used a very complicated cost model that figured out what it would probably cost companies to deploy service. And they picked a window and said if it was above a certain cost, then it needed support. But if it was too expensive, they didn't want to include that either. So through the mechanisms of this cost model, they determined that they would give consolidated support for 28,399 locations. The difficulty is that there were actually 45,000 locations in these blue territories. So Consolidated met its requirements, and it provided DSL service to the required 28,399 locations. So for the Rdof, the next phase, it's important to note that what the Rdof did is it said, the FCC for the Rdof, it said, we are going to select census blocks. These blue marks here in the Connect America Fund are similar, they're census blocks. But they're clipped to the Rdof territory, so it's not the entirety of a census block. So that gets complicated. And it also said that we're only going to fund those census blocks where no provider said that they've got availability of 25/3 service. And then from those unserved census blocks, again, we're only going to select those census blocks where we think the cost is within the perfect cost window, not to more than we expect the companies could deploy and earn back their investment, but but lower than the maximum cost we think that is too exorbitant for the program to support. Then they did a reverse auction, and they said, we're going to select. I'm getting a lot of feedback from someone here. We're going to select the company that offers service to these census blocks at the lowest cost. And then the FCC requires deployment to these areas to all locations in these census blocks within 6 years. So this is for Vermont. There were 5 bidders, and the five winning bidders, and they are scheduled to receive a total of $3 million a year, each year over the next 10 years. And they're required to serve areas that the FCC thinks have 19,330 locations. It's important to note that EC Fiber and Kingdom Fiber are both members of the NRTC consortium. So in actuality, the number of the FCC model that estimated the quantity of locations in these territories, it isn't super accurate because it's based on household census household information, but it's also not completely incorrect. So there's the good news, I guess, is that there's a greater quantity that they are expected to serve than are actually there, which suggests that the FCC's approach of holding them to require service to all locations in the territories is a reasonable approach. By that, I mean that the companies should expect to serve every location within their census blocks. This map is on our website, and it's available on our website in a moving map, in an interactive map in addition to this PDF map. It's hard to see all the individual census blocks on a PDF, but this shows you the extent of the territory. So much of the Northeast Kingdom is covered in the 2 different companies, Kingdom Fiber and Consolidated. Consolidated, you see, has service in places all around the state. EC Fiber has quite a number of territories. SpaceX was awarded locations in very strange hodgepodge things. Most of the places that SpaceX was awarded are tiny little segments, many of which actually don't have any buildings in them. It's an interesting dynamic, the way that the FCC, the way that they did it's an art, what the FCC might call a data artifact. It's a result of clipping census blocks. If you assume a census block has 100 households and then you clip a segment of it, you don't really know for sure if the clipped segment has a building in it. And that ended up with many of the census blocks have that. Many of the SpaceX census blocks have that problem.
Corey, if I could just interject there, it's worth noting that the Rosenworcel Commission is looking into some of the census blocks that were awarded through Rdof. It was her opinion that some of these awards were made in haste and that they include areas that are not deserving of USF support. So the blocks might change, or the information might change in the coming weeks and months.
Yes, yeah, I agree, and that would be good, especially for census for SpaceX. For deployment, the Rdof requires, this is important to note that the FCC Rdof requires the companies to offer both voice service and broadband service independently as separate standalone things. So if you live in an Rdof census block, the company is required to offer a standalone telephone service by itself, just telephone service. And it's also required to offer standalone, just broadband service if you want it, or of course a bundle. And then for deployment, they've got this rolling schedule, so that it's required 100% deployment within 6 years, but also 40% after the end of the 3rd calendar year after funding, and 20% again after each year after that. And then for compliance, the FCC requires that the bidders submit a letter of credit. And the purpose of this letter of credit is to allow recovery of past support disbursements from a company that may eventually default. And the FCC also includes a non-compliance framework that calls for greater reporting and a withholding of support if the company fails, if the grant recipient fails to comply. So that covers my presentation. And if you
Laura.
have questions, I can answer some quick questions.
Thanks, Corey. I have a question. With the compliance, how are, who is certifying that those addresses are served? Are the companies? Is it self-certification?
So I want to just make one thing clear here. This is the FCC's telecommunications programs generally and FCC programs are very complicated. And we at the department have a lot of experience in telecommunications issues, and we try to follow these issues, but we're also very busy doing lots of other things. And so I don't know the arcana of this as things are changing quickly in this complicated field. But in general, what I would say is that the companies are required to report to the FCC that they have complied with the requirement, and the FCC will follow up with them if they think that that's unreasonable.
So I think
the
what I
answer
heard
to
you
your
say-
question.
Yeah.
The answer to your question is this is self-reporting. The company itself needs to report to the FCC that, yes, we have complied with the requirement. And usually that is through a process of providing a list of addresses.
Okay.
So for instance, and the way that the FCC does this is it's actually outsourced the implementation of these grant programs to a company, quasi company called the USAC, the Universal Service Administration Corporation. So the companies, FCC, like say for instance, EC Fiber will be required to provide a list of addresses that it has provided service to. It must provide that list of addresses to USAC through its hub portal. And then if it provides the correct number of addresses, then USAC will report to the FCC, yes, the company has complied with its obligations.
Holly. Just to be clear, when we say reporting addresses served, it's addresses passed, right? It's not addresses to which there's been connection to the network.
So all of this discussion is about the availability of service, not any discussion about the adoption of service.
So then, yes.
Right.
Corey, can you go over the Rdof timeline? And the reason I asked this question is that Rdof has certain time markers that folks that participated in the auction that they have to meet. And we also have timeline markers. And I'm just curious the overlap. Did you hear the question?
Yes.
Yes.
So the Rdof deployment obligations are such that are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
So it says we will require support recipients to commercially offer voice and broadband service to 40% of the calculated number of locations in the state by the end of the third full calendar year following funding authorization.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And that timing is as reflected in your chart then?
I believe so.
Barry, can you talk briefly about what happens if Rdof winner defaults? If they can't fulfill their commitment, or if they're sold, if they go out of business, like what are the contingencies? Or they choose not to, I guess is the
Rob, if they go out of business, there's nothing the FCC can do.
Well, Clay, I think the important thing here is, are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the FCC requires part of the process. The FCC requires a letter of credit to allow recovery of disbursement. So past disbursements.
Well, what happens to those locations?
So if the company, I'm not quite sure I follow your question, Rob. Can you try your question again?
That it would be sold.
I guess there's a presumption that it would be sold. Okay, I guess what I'm saying is if a company has a commitment to build them and then they no longer can meet that commitment, are those addresses served by someone else? Are they thrown back into the next phase of Rdof? what happens to that support that was pledged to those locations?
So I think there are many different questions that you've posed in one there. I think that if a company, first of all, if a company has a grant from the FCC, that's not something that anybody should or would take lightly. And the FCC does a very deep due diligence process in its long form evaluation, and it requires this letter of credit. And it's got there's an assumption that the company is going to provide the service to these locations, and it's not something that anybody takes lightly.
So let me ask this question. So in the past, Rob, there have been federal awards for service delivery to a number of addresses that have not happened. And so if that were to happen in this case, if a company was awarded funds to provide service to addresses and they didn't take the funding and didn't provide the service, are there any repercussions for that company?
Are you asking about repercussions, Laura? Or are you asking about what happens to the addresses?
Yeah, well, that's what we're concerned about, is how to think about the Rdof addresses. That's really what we're concerned about. Like, should we say, check, those are done? Or, well, we got to keep an eye on those, and which is certainly where I am. I don't think, and
I think it's always good to keep an eye on this program and be sure that the promises that were made are being kept. I think a kind of more salient question is, at what point do you decide to provide state subsidy to the same locations? Because certainly you don't want to double fund an area that already has a federal solution in place. With that said, I will remark that when we were completing the telecommunications plan earlier this summer, we did have Rdof winners who advocated for the state providing additional subsidy to the Rdof winning areas, which to us, I think, raises an alarm as to whether the promises made are realistic. I think it was our position in writing the telecom plan that if there's a funded federal solution in place for these areas, that we may not want to make that the primary focus of state funding. There is a second phase to Rdof, Laura. So it was my understanding when the Rdof order came out that addresses that were not covered in phase one would also be, that were supposed to be covered in phase one, but ultimately not covered, would be covered in phase two.
New addresses? Like additional addresses?
There are two phases to Rdof. So this phase is just for census blocks that are considered completely unserved or not contaminated. And then phase two, after they complete the DODC proceeding to figure out a better way to do mapping, they will move to phase two, which will be the contaminated census blocks. I believe, I'm not 100% certain, but I do believe that addresses that for whatever reason were not covered in phase one will be rebid in phase two. Corey, maybe you know differently, I don't know.
I believe that is the intent, that if for whatever reason there is a problem with the deployment or compliance with phase one, that the FCC, that the money is available and the money is committed for those census blocks, and they would pursue trying to get the company to continue to deploy it. And if the company just balked and said that we're bankrupt, then those census blocks and those funding would be available. And as Clay suggested, I just believe that they would be rolled into the next auction, the phase two auction.
So the addresses are set. And so phase 2 would just look, did the address get served? If not, we're gonna rebid the same address.
I
Phase 2
believe
is
so.
not new addresses.
No, phase 2
Well-
will be, they, or you might be aware of this, but the FCC is in the process of changing the way that it does broadband availability data gathering. It's everybody is frustrated with the way that the FCC collects broadband data. And they're in the process of changing that mechanism. And they don't want to do the Rdof phase 2 to go after the very messy problem of partially served census blocks until they get the data fixed. And so their process right now is to fix the data collection process to get their data at the same sort of discussion that you folks are having about getting a baseline. They want to get the data right. And then they're going to proceed to the auction for the unserved locations in those partially served census blocks.
So I have a different question. Are you, okay?
Yeah, I would just say that begs the question of, like, how will the CUD's planning areas be treated in that with FCC?
Well,
Yeah.
I think the question is to what degree this RDOF is an overlay for our work, right? And so one of the questions I have, and I apologize, I don't know if this goes to Clay or Corey. Hi, guys. What is the level of funding that's part of this program? And does it net out in a per mile, in a dollars per mile or dollars per address format?
Corey, you want to take a initial stab at that?
So it was a bid process, Holly. It was the FCC made these census blocks available and called for bids for the lowest bidder to provide service. So this is what the bids showed. Companies bid on these locations, and here's the amount of support. This is annual support over 10 years. So it's $30 million for approximately 20,000 locations.
Yeah, and you actually have the David Healy's email addresses that specifically to CD fiber. Nationwide, it worked out to about 15% of the total cost per address.
Do you know if that was in Vermont?
Well, we're about
10% off coupon is what we called it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and you
not a
should
lot.
also know that I've read just an article just the other day that there's a lot of defaulting going on right now because either the applicants were overzealous, or what I'm hearing from the applicant that I spoke to in Vermont is, well, they expected to get more money. So somewhere between there.
Well, they bid. How can they expect to get more money?
I don't know what that's
Hope springs eternal, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Corey, do I have this right? They bid by block. They didn't bid for a number of locations unless they did the math to try to translate blocks into locations, right? They were bidding on blocks.
They were bidding on census block groups, and the census, no, the bidding was unblocked, right? The bidding was unblocked. The awards were on groups, but the bidding was unblocked. And the model spit out the quantity of locations in the census blocks.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Keep in mind.
Just for the recording or the conversation, Dan and I have both done the math, and that equals out to $168.30 per location.
That's every year. That's over each year.
That's
Yeah.
per year.
Okay, big deal. 1683.
Okay, but
But keep in mind, Holly, I think your question's very good. The level of support needed depends, I think, on the company. And for Consolidated Communications, this is a support mechanism that it and its predecessors have relied on for over 30 years now or more. This is an amount of support that they have come accustomed to. They have used previous awards under CAF to further push out their fiber. So for instance, Consolidated has, fiber to their remote terminals. They are much closer to that last mile than perhaps some other bidders were. So I mean, it's really a matter of what the solution is that's being funded. with that said, there is, a national concern that I think Christine just highlighted. There is an organization out there called ERIC, as mostly, I think, made up of telephone companies who believe that they were substantially underbid, or they were, outbid by companies who are very much lowballing it. So it's not a perfect situation, but both the RBOX and there's a separate program that we haven't talked about for rural Lex. They also get high cost support. It's a totally different issue. But this is an amount of money that they've been relying on for many, many years, and have kind of built it into their into their cost models.
Thank you.
Corey, can I ask, I think I know this to be true, but please confirm for me, the mapping you've done already based on the RDOF results, you've captured the data to the degree it can be accurate in the PSD data, right? You guys have that layer, and census blocks and at least the locations presumed to be in those census blocks by the awardee, and we have at least have our best pass at that data already.
So to be this could easily turn into a different discussion, but this was posed as a discussion about RDOF. So we have the information about the RDOF territory and the information about the quantity of locations in those territories, and that's published on our website. Broadband deployment data that we have published in the past and that we are working on updating now is only information from the service providers saying where they have service. So we've asked the companies to say where they offer service today, and that's what is in the broadband deployment data, and that's what we are updating right now and will update soon. The RDOF has nothing to do with that.
Right.
And in the past, when the department has done programs, we have considered, for instance, where broadband deployment is available, and then we considered things like ongoing things in process, like the RDOF or Connectivity Initiative state grants or other grants that we are aware of, or CUD programs or programs that people are contemplating. And then we subtracted those locations on a location basis to make areas eligible. So to answer your question, Brian, we are working on updating the broadband deployment data. That'll be static information about what is present today, with no analysis given to other projects in process. It would be our experience that you would probably retain an expert and do that calculation yourself to consider which locations you might want to add or subtract from your eligibility requirements.
Got it. Thanks.
Is it fair to expect, Corey, and this was billed as an RDOF conversation, but it was billed as an RDOF conversation because we needed to understand the data. So they are closely related. So is it reasonable to expect that as you're building layers of programs that are impacting locations, that you would accept a layer from the VCBB of locations funded or planned?
So the statute directs us to work with service providers, and we talk to service providers and ask them to tell us where they have service available. So for instance, EC Fiber it provides information about where they have service available. We would expect if a CUD becomes active and starts providing service, we would ask them for service. We would ask them for information about where they have service, and we would include that in our broadband statistics. I don't think that we would ask companies about where they are going to have service.
Okay.
And I don't think that we would ask the
think,
VCBB.
Holly, that would be a separate data set or a separate map.
I was just thinking it could be an overlay, or I think we've thought it might be an overlay.
I think it definitely could be an overlay, but I would expect that that would be something that you would do.
Corey, when we do our broadband availability solicitation, do we ask them where you'll have service in the next 6 months, or is it the 6 months prior?
I think it said as of 12/31/20.
20, okay. I thought in the past we had done it kind of forward looking, but I can see reasons why we wouldn't continue to do that.
So the new data set that's coming out October-ish will not include anything that's been built in 2021.
In
Correct.
some cases it does. I mean, I've been working very diligently with all the providers to try to get their data as accurate as possible. But you know, the biggest data sets come from the cable companies, and they're a product of their annual analysis, which comes at the end of the year.
So like, for
Basically-
instance, we know Consolidated has built a lot of fiber this year. That's not going to be included in the maps, or is it? I mean, I guess I'm trying to get whether it varies from company to company, or
It
whether
varies
really
from
is
company to company.
Okay, so it's not a 12/31/2019, 2020 cutoff.
It's a very, I must say that it's a painstaking, difficult process, because you have two choices. You can be rigorous and say, this is the way that you must send us all data, and make it up to them to send you data, and then you could easily incorporate that. But you'll get very limited compliance. Basically, everybody will ignore you because it's a voluntary process. The alternative is to be super flexible and take things written on the back of a napkin and try to make sense of it, and get better data, but that takes a lot of work. And so we're trying to do the best we can.
You all are doing great, and I think we all recognize that we have the best data in the country. It still is some of it from the back of a napkin, but it's but it is really good data, and we appreciate all that work.
Keep in mind, you asked about Consolidated, and certainly we do publish a map of 100, but for your charge, you know, my understanding is that the addresses that the VCBB and the CUDs are focused on with public funding, at least to start, are those that don't have 25/3, and Consolidated's fiber builds are an overbuild of cable video service by and large. So we don't expect that CCI's fiber construction is actually going to advance the 25/3 bucket that far, if at all. It will advance the 100 bucket, but we don't see it as a bill that's going to get unserved and underserved people fiber service this year.
Right, it's more of if they're building out to Rdof addresses that they may.
Right, when they start Rdof, when that starts, then I think you'll see CCI fiber making an impact on unserved locations.
One thing that I did want to mention, that Clay, that you reminded me talking about CCI fiber, as you're contemplating the idea of whether you want to provide grant funding to locations that are subject to Rdof grants, a couple of things that you might want to think about are that, you know, if a company is going to if you're going to give a grant fund to a company that's going to overbuild an Rdof territory, that really leaves one of two options. The new entity either is going to partner with that Rdof recipient, right? They're going to partner with them somehow, which means giving the Rdof recipient more money to do something that it has already agreed to do in a public process. So that's one option. The other option is you're going to compete with that the company that you're supporting is going to compete with that company. So that means that will be essentially undermining the business model of both entities, because the new entity that you're giving a grant funding to is going to have a competitor that has public subsidy, and the company that the FCC is giving money to has a public subsidy that's going to be competing against your company. Those are really the only two options that you have if you're going to give money to a company that is already a grant recipient. Another thing that you might want to consider, I don't have an opinion on this, but you might want to consider whether ARPA funding can be used to build something that's already subject to a grant. I don't know, have an answer on that.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. The folks that bid in Rdof were bidding in a time frame when fiber costs were a whole lot lower. So their business model needs to have additional pancake grants to make it work. So even though they're getting potential grant dollars from Rdof, or not getting, they are getting grant dollars from Rdof, the business case has changed so dramatically because the cost of equipment is through the roof. So I think they do need to pancake and layer on in order to make Rdof come to fruition.
That's one good reason. Another good reason for collaboration with an Rdof recipient is that you then have a local view on how that deployment is happening and the support of that community union district in ensuring the delivery. And I just think that that's worth paying something more for anyway, personally.
This, I absolutely think it's something that we're going to need to figure out. But I think the question is whether or not these funds, the ARPA funds, are eligible to be used there.
On
That's
top of Rdof.
Yes, right.
Can we pancake and layer up?
Which does not mean, I mean, so if the answer is no, then, I mean, I think when we're putting together models, because we're clear that ARPA dollars are probably not going to do 100% of all the areas, that we're looking at, where's the municipal bonding, is probably where those addresses would be funded from, or whatever additional funds.
In which event we would apply the incidental rule about crossing through that territory. Overlay or overbuild. And who makes that determination? Is it this committee or commission, the outsourced arbiter of how ARPA funds get spent? Or how do?
So the state has been relying very heavily on guidance.
That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure that that's where finance and management or others would, but I think that's a question that we should ask.
I have that question.
Right away.
Yeah, we put that
right away, because it really defines
well, I mean, it's just,
a lot of how we allocate funding.
Well, I think it more allocates how the CUDs think about, when we're putting together the financing, because it's probably not all our ARPA funds. What addresses are being funded with which funds.
So let's put that on the parking lot list very clearly.
Get legal.
What is it? What are the
It's
words that you
legal.
want
What I
in
have is
there?
can ARPA funding be used to? Let's just start off locations. We need a legal opinion on that.
To thread the needle a little bit more, one other challenge, one other decision we're going to have to make is, are we going to fund building by another provider to an address that was won by a different company in Rdof if they're not working together? So it's a different question of if it's a block that's won by a CUD or won by a provider that's the operator in that area versus where it's a different operator and they're not working with the CUD. There's so many layers to this.
This is one step to that. Answering that question. I have to say, and I'm loving that you know these things, Laura, but there's these references to, and there's other funds that are being applied in this scenario. So at some point, it'd be great if we talked about and maybe we'll get our dashboard for the CUDs, and we'll understand what kind of funding they have outside of ARPA or our funding. So, because I'm just unclear when you say, there's other money out there.
Well,
how much is coming from where?
Act 79, we set up the CUD, said plan how to get to every address in your territory.
Right.
Act 71, we stood up this board to support the CUDs to get out there, including and especially thinking about how are you going to finance that plan. Right. And so that's the work that, how are you going to finance it? We were fortunate enough to also have a whole slug of federal money come in. Okay, so even if
And you're
the,
talking about the 2020, 2021.
I'm talking about the, like,
COVID
hopefully
funding.
$250 million that we have to,
Oh,
allocate
you're
out.
talking about this next.
But- Everything that we are doing, even if that money was not there, was still gonna happen, right? So the CUD still have to figure out how to finance. They're pulling in different buckets of fund. They're pulling in different funds. So in addition to the funds that we're gonna be allocating, I mean, we've got NBRC, RUS, you've got, some private funding, you've got all different types of
CIA.
funding, and the potential for, and the likelihood of bonding at some point
Yeah,
down the road,
absolutely.
right? And so what we're doing, well, not what we're doing, but the funds that we have now help kind of really lower the cost for affordability and also to get to that bonding. The business makes the business case a lot better.
I
So that's
understand
what I
that we're
mean.
seeded, we're seeded.
Yes. So there's a lot of other pieces of funding. I mean, one of
Yeah,
the
potentially. Yeah.
NBRC person, my understanding, hopefully, is that is a person that's helping kind of put together the financial stack, right? When you're looking at putting together, building a project, I'm my economic development hat on, right? So if you're expanding a business or relocating a business, you're bringing together a whole bunch of different sources of funding for that project. Are we on the same page?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could just add just one last parting thought, it sounds like we're probably coming to the end of your need for us, but we talked about Rdof today. The rural local exchange carriers also get high cost support for their territories through a separate program. So you have a similar problem. It's different, but it's similar. One that you may want to also think about as you proceed with projects inside the RLEC territories. And that we're certainly less knowledgeable on. That might be a good discussion to have with the individual telephone companies.
Okay, I know less about that world, so I can't actually follow that conversation.
Yep.
Do you guys
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the small providers, the.
give an example?
Waitsfield, telephone.
Waitsfield.
Shoreham, Telephone, Topsom, Franklin,
Okay.
the TDS companies. The companies, you go back to Corey's first slide, that make up about 16% of the geographic territory.
Yeah.
On that green and blue map.
Will that presentation be posted to our meeting?
We'll send it to you, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
you.
anything else on Rdof? Corey and Clay, thank you both very much.
Thank you, it was our pleasure. Good luck.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. I
Bye-bye.
know this was short notice. You did a great job.
Okay, next item on our agenda. Are there any other follow-up discussion or questions relative to that conversation?
There is one statement that sticks in my head. I think we have to acknowledge it and at some point decide what we're going to do with it. Corey said, these are companies that have already been paid to do something. And historically, both CCI and the ILECs have been getting high cost support from the Universal Service Fund, and it hasn't made it either practical or they just haven't supplied the service we're looking for them to supply. So I stop processing a little bit when I hear they have promised to do this anyway. Well, I think funding through programs like ours helps ensure that that level of service is done. So it's not like we're giving them an abundance of riches. We're helping control or guide how this happens through providing additional funding through this program.
When they are working with a CUD
When they are working with
on a
CUD.
universal service plan.
Or are in that special category of telcos that are also allowed to apply for construction funding independently.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just think we need to have visibility on what they've been awarded, what the gap is and how we can help that gap post. But I agree with you. I don't want to, the goal is to get everybody connected. The art is how we do that in each given opportunity. And so I don't want to rule anything out, but I want transparency and visibility about what we're doing and not doing as it relates to those layers of funding that are available.
So as part of our request for submissions, we can bake that in terms of what grants and
Yes.
commitments are included already in their business plan. What commitments do they already have?
Or which ones exist that they are not accessing and why, right? And someone may be.
Well, we have to keep a roster, I guess, right? The checklist.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Because somebody may deliberately not go for grant money. I don't know why they would, but maybe they are. And that's fine. I just want to know why. Because that goes into our decision making.
There could be some barrier.
Yeah, it could be some risk tolerance thing, some administrative overhead thing. It could be a bunch of things. But if someone's not accessing funding that is known to be available, that's fine. Just explain it.
Can we list out the available grants that we're aware of and say which, have them check off, Northern Borders, VC, there's VLI.
That belongs on our to-do list.
But list them all out and explain, have them check which ones they've applied for. If they haven't applied, why? Because there's one that we looked at WEC and we got to the end of it and we're like, we can't apply because we don't meet the criteria. We're not as a cooperative, we're not a municipal. We didn't meet the criteria. We got thrown out for that singular reason.
Is that a step in the pre-construction phase or is that a construction phase step?
I don't know the answer to that, but it should be somewhere in the process.
Well, in the pre-construction phase, it was only open to CUDs, and they were asked about previous funding they've received. That was also in the capacity survey. That's the start of the maturity model that was sent out as well.
But this is really a little bit different, here's the list of what you could apply for or programs that are out there. How many have you applied for?
It's possible they may not have known about a particular one and just said, oh, I didn't know about that.
We're kind of helping educate in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is one of the roles that we do see for the broadband project developer as well, because there's a lot of different funding opportunities out there. It all depends on how you thread the needle and making it fit. There's a lot of funding for libraries and for schools and connecting unserved students. And it's challenging to keep track of them. Even for Christine and I, never mind the individual CUDs. And that is something that we see this position playing an important part of, to make sure that we're leveraging as much funding as we can, as possible, from as many sources.
Most of those school programs that you mentioned are not part of building a fiber network. Yeah.
No.
So then the little thing that's sort of sticking with me that next then is we need that checklist of the funding sources, and we need to understand how we're going to see the Rdof sites and where that fits into the CUD plan. Do we need to overtly inquire, will your locations, this gets back to the data layer, will your universal service plan include or not Rdof locations? And ask them to be specific about that, right?
Yeah, I just think we need to take the macro step back, and every CUD's got a number of locations. Some of those today are served 100 by 100. Some of those are 25.3. Some of those are below 25.3, and that's fine. That's the baseline. I'd love to understand how, again, our target is below 25.3.
Yeah.
Okay, that's our primary goal. If in serving that goal, we can bump somebody from 25.3 to 100 by 100, that's great. But the primary goal is the below 25.3 sites. And I happen to have a particular Jones about the 4.1 and under sites, because those are just sites that are they're useless, right? You might as well be in a desert. So
thank you, I appreciate that.
No, it is. And if you really focus on those, you're going to get a bunch of 25.3 sites along the way, because that's just the way the maps work out. Not 100%, but I want to know the demographics of your territory and how your plan addresses the demographics of your territory, just like you said, Holly, and it's the data.
That's exactly right. And if you are considering the site served at 25.3 because of Rdof, we just need to know that so that we have because we want to know, are you dependent on Rdof in making your plan?
I guess that's a question looking back at the legislation.
Yeah.
So does the universal service plan have to cover all locations or only all locations without a plan?
Well, I
That's a
think
challenge
that's a
that we-
fundamental question
right.
for this group.
And that's where we're gonna get into that's where we get into some judgment, because if a plan has a group of sites that it's relying solely on RDOF for, and the RDOF timeframe is 2027, and there are a bunch of 4-1 sites, and if we can do something to accelerate that to 2024 or 2023, we should consider that.
100%.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
so CUDs are a territory, right? So they're not necessarily just so understanding what your RDOF is, all of the providers, what's in your territory. But 100%, I think the CUDs have to be planning for, and hopefully are working with or trying to work with the providers, the winners of the RDOF. And in the CUD area, if the winner of those RDOF addresses is not willing to work with the CUD, that's something we should understand, right? That feels very risky for those addresses to me, right? And
Well,
something
and
we
actually-
should think about.
And actually, it's a risk factor for both the CUD and whoever the recipient was, right? I mean, like,
Well, it's riskiest for the people that live at that address,
that's
right?
for sure,
So if
for
you have
sure.
if you have an entity who, that you're in, so
I'm
they're in
tracking
the
with you.
CUDs.
I'm
Yeah,
tracking with you. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking upstream. Everybody's business plan has a weakness in it because of if they're not working together.
and so that winner, the best case for that winner is to be working with the CUD. So if they're not working with the CUD to get, because potentially you're getting it further subsidy or assistance in getting that covered.
So this is the kind of pronouncement that I think this is important information. Where do we catalog it? And how do we ensure that it gets posted?
Yeah, so to me, Dan and I just had a little quick aside. This is should be part of the criteria against which we're scoring applications, is the
Totally
incorporation
agree.
of these concepts into the plan and showing that, we're thoughtful about all these different things. And I think it's an offshoot of the policy or guideline, or what do we call it last time, work practice guideline? That,
Where do
I
we
mean,
use?
we have to give the applicants a roadmap for
Yes,
how we're
right.
going to evaluate their applications. That's what those are.
Bless
And then
you.
when the applications come in, we're going to use those guidelines to score.
And that is really my whole compunction about, and you can call them policies and call them guidelines. I'm just saying, where are the rules of the road here?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, what's important.
But it also gets built back into the baseline data and how we're using it. So, and we did hear Corey say that they're not interested in incorporating a layer of what we're doing. That's a forward-looking planning process layer. And so they'll pick it up when it becomes active. So we should.
That sounds like something that's going to be negotiated a little bit further, probably.
So
Sounds
later
like
in
it,
the
yeah.
agenda today, we are looking at the timeline for construction grants. And how I imagine that we would do it is we would set a goal for when we want the RFP released and then work backwards to determine what decisions we need to make, what policies we need to make to achieve that timeline. And I think a lot of this fits into that discussion as well. Because it's not just RDOF, it's as Corey or Clay mentioned, that a lot of like Shoreham Telephone or some of the other small companies are also getting support and they have requirements to do something by a certain date. How do we accelerate that? How do we make sure that it meets 100 by 100? What do we do if a CUD has an operating agreement for those same areas with a different operator? There's so much sausage to be made.
Well, and I would take that all one step further. If I'm a volunteer sitting on a CED and I can say, oh, I see that my district has an RDOF awardee. How do I mean, have you ever tried to call SpaceX? How am I to be supported in a conversation with that awardee?
In the case of SpaceX, I know those were not considered addresses with a plan since they weren't going to meet the 100 by 100 threshold. But
Okay.
I still get the point, and that is something that we can certainly assist with.
So that's really what I was thinking, is maybe, and this, I throw this out as an idea, I don't know if you're interested, but maybe it would be great for this board to invite the Rdof awardees in and ask, just suggest to them that working together with the CUD would help us leverage additional funding, if that's our position.
I think we better find out if we can. Right? So if we technically can.
Yeah,
if
that
the
question that's on the
right,
board,
so-
yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
there's an order to this, but,
Yeah.
but, rather than just say that CUDs, why aren't you dealing with CCI, for example? And I don't know, maybe that's a really easy thing to do, but maybe if that's our preference, maybe we ought to inform or encourage the Rdof awardees by inviting them to participate in a conversation like that. One of the big barriers in my mind could be that in order to be an Rdof awardee, you have to be a telecom provider of last resort, an ETC. And that's a whole level of obligation to telephone service that I am sure most CUDs are not fixated on. So how does that get sorted out? I don't even know.
I don't know about that, actually. I don't
Well,
know if the
some
CUDs
will
yeah.
and some don't, but I'm just saying, now we're talking, FCC obligations and different kinds of certifications, and it's a whole level, business level of engagement that they have to be aware of, and that comes with Rdof support. So this is the kind of conversation that we could have if we invited Rdof awardees in to talk about whether or not, how, and express whether or not they would talk about whether they would participate is something else, but we could at least talk about how we would like to encourage them to collaborate with or engage with CUDs.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think we're not prepared to have those conversations.
Not yet.
I think once we get our ducks in a row, then I think we can have a constructive conversation. And all the awardees not named SpaceX are companies that operate in Vermont, and we know who those people, who those organizations are. So I think it's a high likelihood we'd have productive conversations. And just let's not fixate on SpaceX. Corey said SpaceX won a bunch of empty census blocks where there's no locations.
Exactly.
Right, and even at their maximum, I think it was like 2,000 locations, or at least modeled that way. So they're again, not to ignore those locations, but they're a small player in this. I doubt we're going to get a lot of face time with them, but they don't represent the lion's share of the problem we're trying to solve.
Right.
I also want to note that I believe all of the CUDs are talking with the Rdof winners in their block outside of SpaceX. Many have NDAs with Consolidated, for instance. Obviously, the folks up in the NEK are talking with Kingdom Fiber. So those discussions are happening. Whether, I guess the board needs to decide our exact role in that of how hard are we pushing? Are we leaving it for them to make decisions? What do we do when there's disagreements? Like, how does this all work? And I would like to hear from.
Part of it, that's their wrinkles to iron out. And I
Yeah,
don't want to
I'm
get
asking
into the
a question.
business.
I'm just asking a
That's what I-
question on
Right,
the grant
right.
about how are they coordinating with RDAP
Right.
recipients in their territory? We shouldn't be trying to solve.
Exactly. No mandates coming from us.
That's what I was trying to
Encouragements,
get at.
sure, but no mandates.
This is really complicated to unbundle because you have RDOF recipients, the wire centers don't match up with the census blocks. And all of this overlaying, where mapping will come in to be quite powerful, I think, because you'll have splits in these. And for the recipient or for the applications to talk about how does this complement or overlay into these districts, because they could be very complementary with the incumbent. And to the points made earlier, have them speak to that. I don't think we can force them to go get this information, but certainly if they've done the research and they've put their heart into the cooperative efforts, that scores high.
Because in many cases, with the census block, it's one side of the road is an RDOF census block, the other side isn't, or you have to go through a census block that's RDOF to get to other unserved areas that the FCC decided weren't qualified this time around. So I don't know if there's a real solution.
On the level, if census block. RDOF reached this territory, but you're filling here with some of the CUD work, and they're cooperating over there, which is RDOF. They will build that RDOF territory, perhaps, and together it achieves the goal that we're seeking to get.
I'm going to just say out loud, and I appreciate what you're saying, that it's got to be a design nightmare, actually. I don't agree with my colleagues who have said that we aren't going to give a mandate or it's their wrinkle to smooth out. I think we should be encouraging collaboration and that the legislation speaks to that. And so I'm not saying that we won't give money or shouldn't give money to CUDs that don't have an RDOF partner. But I think to the extent that we can help set encouragement or guidance for collaborating with RDOF partners, we've got to answer that ARPA question, and we've got to figure out how we get, this is for, in the name of getting service to individual locations, we've got to try to leverage all opportunities. And so how the deal gets worked out isn't our effort, but rather making sure we can clear the way, like if it's getting rid of this ARPA versus RDOF funding question, and maybe having an opportunity for, even if we're just looking at the CUDs, and if they're all talking to the RDOF recipients, then maybe we're just good with that, check that box. But we really need to know that that's happening and that the RDOF recipients know that we expect it to happen.
But we can't do anything about it.
No, but what if we can put it in our scoring criteria and weigh things heavier or lighter based on that?
Absolutely.
But we don't want to penalize
Exactly.
a CUD that is not in collaboration with an RDOF
For the right
winner
reasons.
because the RDOF winner will not collaborate.
Yes,
Exactly.
I'm not-
And that's
I'm not
why we
saying
need
it's a
to have the
binary-
conversation with the RDOF.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a binary,
Right.
in coordination is better than not in coordination. I'm saying I want transparency so that we can, because there's going to be a subjective element to this thing about how we award. There's just got to be. And in that circumstance where a CUD is making good faith efforts, but there's nobody to collaborate with because of the RDOF recipients just not open to it, we're not going to ding them. We just want to know that and know why, because we don't want to let that opportunity pass unverified or you know what I mean?
For example, in Dave Healy's memo to Christine, it is not clear that one of the winners is financially capable of meeting the obligations. There's a red flag. I don't want to mandate that they work with somebody that's not financially viable.
However, in support of Brian's point, the folks that are on this call are not necessarily RDOF awardees.
Mhm.
And so how do they know we're even having this conversation? I just think it's a good thing for us to make sure that we've reached out to RDOF awardees and let them know that we want to understand where they're at, that we encourage their participation with CUDs, that we want to understand how these funds intersect and how the delivery of service will happen. So I just want to make sure that we get the word out there.
Mhm. Okay, let's try to keep moving this along. Any other discussion on this topic right now?
Yeah, I would actually like, Madam Chair, if we could get some clarity from the department about the mapping. And I would like our staff to, so I don't know if we're there yet or not, but I think we need to start settling down back to our previous conversation. Like we're actually not going to be creating two different databases. And so, there's going to be another layer to the state's telecom data and how we cooperate with the department to get that done, I think is something I think we need to start hashing out. Not
Okay.
if,
Right.
but how.
We basically got told no.
Well, I don't know that we
for
did.
that matter.
I don't know that we
That
did,
their
but let's
existing
clarify.
process doesn't make room for that.
Yeah, let me back up. Like we have the interactive broadband map. There's nothing when we have our GIS contract done. There's nothing that says we can't create another layer using the same E911 addresses that can be overlaid onto that map. We can add any layers we want to public data.
So as a So I don't think we want to, I don't think it's in Vermont's best interests or CUD's best interests or a private provider's best interests or taxpayers' best interests for there to be two sets of data that exist separately somewhere that are tracking different build outs of addresses, that we're tracking private and, as CUD comes in here and we're tracking. So I think that conversation needs to, how we are working with the department
I'll take it.
on that. How we're going to sort through that. And I think we still have the elements of what we're going to map, but how are we going to collaborate with?
Yeah, I thought we had said at the beginning with that early discussion that this will be a topic of a subsequent meeting and we'll take this on the phone.
The data, but the how with the DPS is
Oh,
what I'm
I
asking
view it all
about.
together.
Okay.
It's
all
great,
right.
excellent, but it's a conversation that could get started.
Yeah, no, I will have that conversation beforehand. I'll talk to Julie.
Okay. Moving along. Next item on the agenda is grant scoring criteria.
So first, I guess I want to ask, like, how you all want to do this. It can be as simple as saying that we can go through the scorecard. We can say that you trust the staff to do this. We can go through what it says in the RFP for how we're scoring it, which aligns with the scorecard. That's the feedback I want before I start launching in and going through all the different questions we're asking and the points associated.
If you're going to marry the scoring to the RFP, physically, how would you do that right now?
I would say that I used the RFP to inform the scoring.
So doesn't it seem
I
like
went
you
through
should
the
just-
questions. That's what I did.
Don't you think we should just walk through the scorecard and get through that?
If you're open to that, we can certainly do that.
That works for me.
Okay. So in the board packet, there was a PDF of it. I'm going to pull up the actual, I used SurveyMonkey to make this better. So let me pull that up and we'll go through that. Hold on a second here.
I'll just say, because we don't have our task guidelines officially established, it's hard to look at these scoring guidelines and make sure they incorporate some of those decisions that we've been making.
So this is the grant scorecard, and for the people at home, this is more for internal use, so there's not all that much explanation. For those of you that have applied for funding, you'll see these questions align very closely with the RFP and the other survey we sent out. How I imagined it is that this calculates a score. Applications will be recommended for funding if they're over a certain score. The board will still take other feedback and look at individual line items and everything, but this is kind of the baseline. It's for evaluating the grant applications as well as evaluating as part of the risk assessment stuff. There's a few questions in here that were taken from the state of Vermont's risk assessment survey. So first, it's very basic: contact information, amount requested. Top question here: universal service confirmation.
I have a question. Is it all on-grid addresses or is it all locations as defined in the Act? What is the universal service that we're trying to get the CUDs to address?
All underserved addresses in their
Yeah,
territory.
but that's not all on-grid addresses. So this.
Well, all on grid. That's in the application. It does specify on grid.
On-grid being the electrical grid?
Yes.
That's what the universal thing is.
And isn't it the underserved, and underserved
Yes.
addresses?
Yeah.
But it doesn't say that
Yeah.
here.
As I said, this is internal. In the RFP itself,
Oh,
it does
this
have.
is internal?
This is internal. This is for when you and I and Christine and others go to take our first pass through the applications to check the boxes of things that we ask them for in the RFP itself. In the RFP itself, it defines what we want in terms of a universal service commitment, and that was based on the feedback from the board in terms of the exact definition taken from the legislation on grid addresses that are underserved or unserved, so less than
Otherwise known as
25.
locations. Okay.
So, be clear. So that's what I was saying in terms of there's not much explanation here because this is
Internal.
for us. Yes. So that's the first thing. 50 points. It's going to be we can't really approve any application unless that's what they are saying that they are committed to doing. Then we take some time.
Quick, how did you, where did the 50-10, how did the points get derived?
That's where I'm looking for feedback.
Okay, so this is your first.
What's the total number of points that you can possibly achieve here?
The way SurveyMonkey works, it makes it a little bit challenging, because if you have different options, like there's some grants that we're going to get that are just applying for capacity. Some are applying for pre-construction. So if I don't award if they haven't applied and I don't award the points, it's a different point total. So that's why I have the 250, 210. I've tried many times to add it up. Go for it.
Wow. I mean, otherwise you can't discern whether or not 50 is a material.
Well, it kind of, this first one is really a go, no go, so I'm,
Yeah.
you know, I'm,
Put your name on the
275.
paper and you get credit for it.
Thank you.
Waitress.
Wow. So 275, I don't know for sure if that's what SurveyMonkey said, because of how it's strange how they calculate it, but I plan on doing it by manually like that, as opposed to
so,
with SurveyMonkey.
so the question on this first one is, if they don't have a universal service fund, we don't go any further, right?
And
Why
you-
is it not just by even?
Yeah,
award
it's binary.
points?
Go,
It's
no
fine.
go.
Well, it's just if they don't get these 50 points, there's no way it's going to be approved, period.
Well,
This is kind of a gate to even apply, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that'll be listed
and
as
you have to
incorrect,
allot
like red
points
flag.
to it for the system to work.
Yes.
You should state that.
Yeah, but as I said, this is
If you check
Or make
no,
it 275 points, and that way you're never.
that's what I was trying to do with 50. And as I said, this is internal. This is for us. In the application, it does, like, it's one of the requirements. They need to state they have a universal service plan.
So, no, go ahead.
Oh, just that discussion alone, it sounds like we're letting the tool drive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
us instead of us driving the tool.
We don't even need to
It's-
put the question in here for our.
I mean, I like the vehicle
Yeah.
for the discussion.
The other way
Well,
to
more
do-
is what it comes up as when you press the submit button, it comes up as an incorrect answer. And that would be, okay, no go.
The other way to do it is everyone starts with whatever the total is, 250. Everyone starts with 250. So basically, you answer question 3, yes, you get 250 points. And then all subsequent questions deduct points. So that if you answer the question strongly, it's 0 points deducted and you maintain your 250 through that question. Or if you're less than ideal, you deduct a couple of points and now your 250 is a 245 and you work your way down that way. You know what I'm saying?
it's a,
Yes,
it's
Tool-
well,
automatic
it's-
tool
score.
support
as-
that?
The tool does not support that. That's the challenge. At least the version we have access to. So that's why it was more of like, the way this was scored is you're trying to gain points. And I set of how many points you had to get to approve. So it's still doing the same thing. And as I said, this is a guide for when we come back with the applications to the board.
So can we continue the conversation on the merit of each of these and make notes and not hold ourselves up on the tool?
Yeah, like, do we really need to, and I'm wondering, do we need to focus more on the question or the points? I mean,
Well, I just, so 50 is 18% of 275. I just like, it's just a mind blower to
This is a
me.
yes, no gate. to even
Yeah,
get it.
it's like,
So it's like,
don't, it like,
I wouldn't
even
mind if
score.
you're a no.
Yeah,
yeah, don't
I
even
would just
put
stop
point,
at that.
don't even point points to it. It's like,
No, it
if
should
it's
come
no,
to-
it kicks it out of the
Yeah,
whole.
part of the challenge is no one is gonna say that they don't have it, because all the CUDs do have it and they're the only eligible applicants.
so it's just a check.
It's just a checkbox for being able to score this and being able to say
And
how we
it's
rated the
required.
application.
It's a reminder that they
Yeah.
have to do this.
Yes,
It's just a reminder that it's part of getting this.
It's more of an accountability for us.
right.
They
It
know,
is,
I mean, they know, but it's what the law says.
It's like a certification, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Certainly,
we're
exactly.
we're just certifying that we checked that off, that was in the application. That's the best way to,
Yeah,
to
so
put
let's
it.
Make it a certification, not score it. Yes, no
Yeah, the certification is there or it's not.
Okay. That-
Because the other thing is that we can't confirm it, because how would you prove it?
That they have a
They've
universal
been,
service
they've
plan?
been asked to include the language that's in their mission
Yeah.
statement or or the plan or
Yeah,
anything
they
in the
have
RFP. Yeah,
Yeah, but in my mind, okay, so I know that like we don't want to go here, but in my mind, the way you would confirm it is when we get to the point of being clear about our data, we'd say, okay, we have a business plan that addresses the right number of locations that reflects our baseline data allocation for that CUD.
But this also goes to another question of that capacity is something that we're going to be funding in this. In some cases, we're going to be funding updating business plans or finishing business plans.
Understood.
Having a business
but-
plan is not required for the pre-construction, it's required for the construction.
Okay.
So that's
I
the-
know, but
it's
you
the
can
line.
make an exception to every statement, but the fact of the matter is that's what a universal service plan is. And so whether they have it today or plan to have it tomorrow, it's a way of saying, yeah, we've confirmed because we agree this is the number. We, the CUD and the VCBB, agree that this is the number to be served in the universal service plan.
Given the time frame they have and we have, is it in the state of the data, is it fair to ask that question at this moment or not?
I don't think we can answer.
Yeah, so
So I'm just saying we're doing the best we can right
yeah,
now,
it's the
but
right question. I'd love if they could answer that question and we could verify it, but the state of our data doesn't allow either party to do that, right?
They
Well,
can
fine,
answer that question.
They
The
can.
question, they have to, right? I mean, they're
Right.
planning for something, right? I mean, but
No, not this question. The number, the how many locations are in your, like, I'd love to, right up front to know, how many locations in your
locations are in yours?
territory? How many are 100 by 100? How many are 25/3 or more? How many are less than 25/3? How many are
now
less?
that's a universal
the
service
data-
plan commitment.
I would love
Well,
that. but
if
I
we
don't
have the
think data's-
2019,
Yeah,
data, we have the 2019 data, and that's the base data for everyone. Like we've asked them
Use
to
that?
include that on the
Well,
application.
yeah, but you have to have them say what they're using, not that we have it.
Okay, I'm actually gonna, let's see if this switches here. I'm gonna quickly go back to what we've asked for, because this might answer a bunch of those questions. Okay, so this is the RFP. Let me get back to where we're going through here. And you'll see that when we drafted this, I wanted them to be able to create an application that we would view it, we'd understand it, that we could send it to somebody that doesn't know anything about CUDs. They would understand what this is about, what the group is about, and what the history is about. So so let me go back here. So
Yeah,
Yeah, you've got the
that's
question.
right there.
This is,
Right there.
this is great,
Yep.
this is great.
So it's right there. Then we go into current capacity. This aligns very much with the whole scoring thing. Current board members, advisors, current contractors, like what are they doing? How are they managing money? Other sources of funding, we want them to list all grants they were awarded in the previous 2 years. Source, date, amount, and brief
Okay,
summary.
well, let's just stick to this though, not to the whole.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to do is show you
Yeah.
that this is part.
And here's the
And so
universal
I'm
service.
cool that if they've answered those questions, you could say yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's where I'm at here
yeah,
with this. So
I think it's a 0 pointer myself, but,
Yeah, we
it's a yes or no.
we can certainly make it a yes or no or 0 pointer. Like this is just to help guide us. So when we come back in a discussion, and that is also the challenge with this. The way we structured it is a certain amount available to each CUD. So they're competing with us saying yes or no as to whether their plan is reasonable, strategic, and whether they meet the conditions of the law. They're not competing against each other necessarily. In the case of this grant program, that'll be different most likely for construction. So I wanted to know if they have an operating agreement or other partnerships. Feasibility study, we want the link. Business plan, we want the link or status update. And we also have a little note encouraging them to request additional funding because as I can't remember who sent it out, but we've all noticed in Act 71, how they define business plan is different than how the business plan was defined in the Broadband Innovation Grant. And we want all these groups to be ready to apply for construction funding, potentially by December. So that's something that's highly encouraged for the CUDs. And
I'm just gonna note that I sent that out.
Okay.
And I excerpted it from the innovation grants and sent it to you by email, so it's in your partner email. Because the definition of feasibility grant and business plan are different than they are in 71.
And that's already been shared to the CUDs, and we're looking into other ways to potentially fund any updates and see if they can do it themselves versus hiring somebody, or put that word out there to try to find out more information. But that's just something to note in there.
So, Rob, from your perspective, does this then pretty much just mimic the sequence of this pretty much?
It's mimicking it for the most part. There's a few other questions in there that were from the survey that we sent out. Those are mostly the risk assessment, like, have you been audited? Did they have findings? What's your accounting system?
Okay.
So it's asking more yes or no for some things that we're asking them to explain.
So, so can I ask, under this human capacity thing, and because I'm not going to be allowed to ask these questions of you when I'm sitting there scoring, I'm going to ask them now. So, do we really care what the number of committees are? I mean, like, would this penalize people unnecessarily? Like, the number of committees, it doesn't talk about effectiveness or workload or anything. And how many board members volunteer outside of the monthly meeting? Is that something that can be
Well, you know,
validly reported? I
do think it's example of maturity, because I'm not going to mention CUD names, but the active CUDs are doing a lot more work with committees. There is, you know, and on the other extreme, there's not much going on at all. So I do think.
So this is the way that we're trying to figure out how structured they are.
We're trying to separate it from what we know about the CUDs.
Yeah.
We're trying to have something that's more of we're trying to assign a number to it. This goes back to the whole maturity discussion. And it's not perfect. There's some questions like that we have in here, like we asked how many employees. Well, a more advanced CUD that wants to access the bond market, there's an advantage to not having employees. So what do we do? What do we do in terms of that question? Like there's things that there is some variability and there is some subjectivity that's going to go into all these things. Like that's why this isn't the end all. My assumption is if the applicants follow the directions and answer all the questions, that they're going to score really well on this. And then it is up for us to figure out between them to make a more subjective call.
I get where you're at.
Can I ask, I want to volunteer to join Holly in reviewing the first few.
Great.
Or whatever the pre-scoring, because that's going to make me more invested in the content and familiar, and it's just going to help me. So.
Yeah,
I think it's very
that's
helpful.
me too.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful just to understand each of these CUDs. Like that's a challenge I have, is I have so much information up here from working with them that a lot of
like
time.
a blind check for us.
Yes.
Wait, Christine, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm just wondering from a process standpoint, whether you may want to just delegate this exercise to this subcommittee, because it's going to take you a long time to get through this.
Yeah, we're not going to make it through this
We're not
today.
gonna
The
go
time
through
we
it.
have remaining, there's no way.
That's a good suggestion, Laura.
I'm processing that because
Okay.
that's where I was going. Like I have to leave at 12:15, but
Right.
I think we should have some sense of how we're going to score before the scoring happens. I mean, we should have some
Right.
consensus.
Yeah, I'm suggesting that a subcommittee review the score.
And so the consequence of that is.
Can we come back to this at the next meeting and say, our homework is to go review this? Because it's, as Laura said, I can't read this. We didn't get the packet until this morning. I can't read this and give feedback.
Yeah, maybe that's.
This is the challenge. In the RFP, we said that the staff would make a recommendation to the board within 7 days, and then the board would make a decision on the applications. Like this was this is all based on the RFP that has been out there in terms of of the scoring.
It's our RFP. You're held responsible to the board. The board can give us a get out of jail free card for this first round of one application.
Well, there'll be many more, but it's also a matter if we change in the RFP, we have to go through a process of amending the RFP.
So are we changing the RFP or are we weighting the
We're
criteria?
just changing the time frame, given the.
Yeah, we're waiving the criterion of 7 days response. But we're not contractually bound to the applicant to respond in 7 days.
Well,
I'm trying to help. We're not going to change the RFP, but we're addressing the criteria and the weighting of the responses. The RFP
Right, exactly,
stands.
exactly.
Yeah, so
He's worried about the timeline.
Yes,
How
because
will
our
we get-
next meeting.
How will we get the feedback
Our
in
next-
7 days?
because our next meeting right now isn't scheduled to October.
That's right. And I am also concerned about that. So I am also concerned about that. The consequence of doing this, which is something I support, puts us into October, and that is a problem for me.
Like the other
That
option.
Feels like we're twerking the CUDs around a little
Like
bit.
the other option is we fill this out, we don't even have scores to it, but it's used as a reference guide for the board when making decisions. So it kind of is yes
I want
or
you to
no.
score. I want to,
Yeah,
you
no, there
know,
has to be
some of us have time to dive in and do more detailed. There's no way I can review things on a really granular basis. Just can't, humanly can't do it. I want you to score. I want to score for each one.
And how else do you go side by side?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's got to be scored.
I guess going back to the side by side, in some ways we aren't doing side by side, since it's not, they're not competing against each other. There's
No, but if you give a
sentimental
score, it gives you a relative sense of
Yeah,
this
I'm talking about
proposal
side by
versus
side.
Some
that
level
one.
of rigor in the way we evaluate.
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
would like to suggest that we meet that date that we've held for our work meetings.
Which is what date?
It's October 23rd, 28th.
28th,
I'm
it's
away.
still 2 weeks.
You're
I'm away the
Or
27th.
September.
September.
What we can do is give feedback electronically to the group. I think we can respond to this and say,
We could schedule an emergency meeting early next week that's just for an hour to approve the scoring. I think we have to give 48 hours notice just to approve the scoring that we're associating with this. And that would allow things to move forward and score them. Then we can review them as a work group and come back potentially on the 28th to approve these applications. Or
yeah, I'm gonna time out here because workload wise, even if we scheduled a meeting, I don't have time to look at this and digest. It's the reality factor.
So
That's kind of a problem though, frankly.
I know, but it's reality.
Well,
Well, why don't you delegate it to the committee?
Yeah,
That's my point.
delegate to-
Delegate it.
Exactly. If there's a subcommittee, I'm happy to do that, but to have us all meet and try to make,
Then let's do that. Subcommittee, you comfortable with
I'm totally comfortable.
okay. So we have a subcommittee and so,
That's my point. Use the subcommittee to make,
That's going to that's going to put something forward to the board prior to.
well, that's up to you.
I would delegate this action and you guys make sense of it and make a recommendation, go.
Make a recommendation or go ahead and score.
Go ahead. Go. You put that trust in our fellow board members.
So to me, it's a two-step process. I need to review this
Mhm.
and give feedback on it. You will do the same. We need to align that feedback. Rob's, and then, so the three of us or the four of us need to come up with a new version of this based on that feedback. Or ideally, it's perfect and our feedback says, great, nothing's changed. You
And
never
it's,
know.
it's aligning with the RFP that has
Yeah.
already been
Yes.
issued.
Yes.
It is
Right.
not saying, it's not trying to recreate what's
Basically, I
already
want to
out
sit down
there.
with the RFP and this
Yeah.
side by side and go through it.
If we don't like what we've sent out on the RFP, too bad.
That's not
what
bad
we
on
sent
us.
out.
All align
Right.
scoring
Okay.
around.
and Rob and I will commit the time. We need
Fine.
committee to do.
Yes.
Right, I make a motion that we set up a subcommittee to review the grant scoring matrix as submitted in our agenda. And that subcommittee is comprised of Holly and Brian.
I'm happy to work on that subcommittee, but I am not happy to score. I don't want to score.
Well,
I don't think we
it
can.
doesn't make a lot, it's not helpful to not do both.
For the subcommittee, it can't be more than 2 people and a
Great.
staff
That's right.
person because of quorum
Convene.
issues.
Fine.
Okay, so perfect. We'll work with you.
All right, so I made a motion. Is there a second? All right, Dana seconded that motion. Any more discussion? Oh.
Just time frame to have this done.
Yeah, really, we need to know what the,
Can-
this next week is.
You need to have
Can we
it done
meet Friday?
in,
Again,
Can you
Tomorrow?
meet tomorrow to go over this?
I need to. so
We
what I-
need to have time to review it.
Yeah,
Staff continues to forget that we actually have to have time to review things.
So I need alone time with the RFP and this to side by side to develop my comments and feedback. Then I'm thinking then I think each of you, well, at least Holly does. Then I think we get together and we either email that feedback together to get it going, or then we just hash through it on a phone call. And then the outcome of that, try to time bound it. So we say, yep, we're gonna have this done by Tuesday, maybe. I don't know what's
Yeah.
feasible. And then we're good. And we get to score.
And it probably would make a lot of sense because I think you can talk me off ledges, Brian, and maybe I can ask questions that you'll be successful in responding to that we don't have to bring to staff. Let's try to get a consolidated
Okay,
response.
That's fine.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
And
By
then
Tuesday.
by Tuesday?
so the committee will issue a response to the whole board
Yes.
by Tuesday, the 21st.
Or do you want us to talk to, this is just a question, it's not a suggestion. Or do you want us to talk to to Rob and Christine about our comments and then give a report to the board.
Yeah, so you guys have some internal work you're gonna do, but on the 21st, you report out to the board. This
So
is-
that means that we need to do our analysis on Friday and Saturday, talk to the staff on Monday, and then have a report out on Tuesday.
Yes.
Is that doable? Brian's like, what did I sign
Yeah,
up
It's
for?
just
you know,
it's
I'm
challenging.
just kind of aware of where the work is inappropriately cattywampus on the board. And I'm starting to say, you know, like, yes, we need to respond to these CUDs, but we also need to be able to be realistic and being able to get our work done.
To be fair, the RFP has been out there and available, and this was printed out in the board packet sent yesterday.
Yes,
When we're
but
meeting every week, it
but
is
we're
a challenge.
talking about this.
That
Yeah,
was
so-
in the board packet.
So let me just propose,
That went out, yes.
is there a problem with having these two evaluate this by Tuesday and then having the response to the board by Thursday?
So I'm more concerned about the
When it gets
timeline to the CUDs. So that's, for me, that's the place that we work from. And then build as much time and space for everybody that's doing the work. So what's the goal?
So
for the
what day
CUDs,
was
what did we
that
tell them?
CUD application
The first
Received.
application came in on Tuesday.
from?
Is that necessarily
Why
relevant?
not?
Tuesday, the date,
Public information.
14th?
It came in from Maple CUD. I'm
Okay.
expecting applications from several others early next week.
Yeah, but Tuesday, Maple CUD, Tuesday being Tuesday of this week. So
14th.
under the rules of the RFP, we would be owing them a response to their application by
Well,
Tuesday.
Well, it's a staff recommendation
I
to
would
the
say work days,
board,
right,
and
so
then the
maybe-
board decides at the next meeting.
Okay, this is helpful. So we have to have a response to the
Yep.
first,
Staff,
Staff has to make a
to
recommendation.
the board on
on the
Tuesday.
21st.
Tuesday.
Yes,
That was a bad rule.
Is it working days or is it days? I mean, if it's
we
working.
can say
days,
working days. I
Yeah,
don't
that'd
think
be
it's
Thursday.
specified
That gives us 2 more.
to where the
Yeah.
staff can do
That's
that.
actually
And then,
Yeah.
and then, is there a time
For
that?
you.
Yeah, exactly. We can't, I don't think we should do, I've always understood business to be a working day.
Like, and the following week, is there a day as a board that we can meet for a short meeting to go only addressing applications so we could move that going forward? We also do need the grant agreement as well is the next step after that. And I know you were going to.
Before we go there, I think the recommendation was that the subcommittee would make those decisions.
No, the subcommittee is just going to review this matrix.
Oh, okay, all right. I thought-
Well, and the subcommittee is going to review the matrix and review the grant
Review
application.
grant applications and score
Not
them. I
just
think
both,
Why
right?
don't-
that's true.
And then make a recommendation. That our response is part of the staff's recommendation to the board.
Well, why don't I do this too? I will share with the board, the first application that came in. There's some information that is confidential, be clear. That may help you with going through the scoring, to see how it all aligns. So you'll have the RFP, you'll have the first response, and you'll have the scoring system.
Will you send those three things out to the subcommittee? Again,
Yes.
I don't know if I can put my hands on the original RFP, the scoring guide, and the first response.
Yes.
We'll treat that as confidential.
Yes. Parts of it will be, but all applications are confidential until they're accepted anyway, but yeah.
And here's an open meeting law question. Since we're a subcommittee of this board, do we have to warn meetings of that subcommittee?
No.
It's not a subcommittee, it's a working group of less
Working
than
group,
four.
let's call
Less
it a
than
working
Yeah,
group.
you're not a quorum.
Because
And we're not a quorum.
We're gonna go on
Yeah.
the
Right.
independent work, and you and I are gonna speak.
Right.
and then-
I just want to make sure that we're like,
Okay, Laura,
So to be clear with our process, 7 days, staff has to make a recommendation to the board about this first application that was received on Tuesday. So that's the 21st. So they're making a recommendation to us. We are not scheduled to meet until October.
4, 5, 6, 7, the 7th day, this
our
23rd.
next meeting is
23rd,
September
excuse me.
28th.
Excuse me, that's right, it's 7 business days. So our next meeting is in October, or are we meeting
We're
on
meeting
the,
on the 28th.
we are meeting on the
Are
20th?
we meeting on the 28th now? We had originally said.
No,
that was
I
just gonna
think
be
they
working
just
group.
made-
I cannot meet on the 20th. I'm just letting you
Well, you made the recommendation, so you're up.
That's true. As long as we have quorum.
So my,
So we'll be-
Just-
know. Fine.
for folks, just to set the expectation for CUD world. So we're 7 business days. And we are meeting then, and at our next meeting are likely making funding decisions or can make funding decisions at our next meeting.
On the 28th. That's,
One
I have on the
funding
calendar.
decision.
Well,
There will be
There will be
others
others.
that come in.
But it won't have the 7 days for review. You won't have the impact of the subcommittee. It won't, I just want to be realistic that by the 28th, you'll have the recommendations that you received on the 21st or on the 23rd.
recommend,
So when are you expecting other applications to come in?
early next week, if not today or tomorrow.
And so if we have grant applications, pre-construction grant applications that come in on the 21st, right, they would be out
On the
of
25th,
the
yeah.
7-day
Right.
time frame. And so then that decision would be moved into the October meeting.
It's 7 days to review from. So if an application came in tomorrow.
Yeah.
We have to have a review back by the following,
One,
a recommendation to the board, and it says the board addresses it at their next board meeting.
5,
So
6,
those would be
7.
on the 28th.
Yeah, you could make recommendations on the 28th and it could be addressed on the 28th. I'm
But
just worried about how we're going to handle this as your subcommittee, that's all.
Yeah, the point is you're making is there's a cutoff date. It's not, so,
Working
you know, if things come in next Monday, they aren't gonna get reviewed on the.
No, they will.
Well,
They will, because the 7 days ends up being the following Tuesday, which is before a Thursday board meeting.
I know that this subcommittee has to review them.
They'll have
They'll have-
7 days.
They'll have had 7 days to review them and make a recommendation to
Okay,
the
all
full
right,
board.
good, got it.
But the CUD will not receive feedback until after the board meeting?
CUD, depending on what the recommendations are, like we could request that the CUD attend the board meeting to answer any questions. If there are questions that need to be answered in executive session, that's something that could also happen.
And if we don't have enough information based on the application, we don't have to recommend it for funding.
That is true. There's a negotiation process.
We need a calendar. We need so two requests, and I don't mean to text. Can we always have in the minutes the date and time and location of the next board meeting?
Yeah.
So it's always there. And then the second thing is all of these dates of meetings and submissions.
I like it when it's on the agenda too.
Yeah, but better, whatever. That works great. Either one. And then, I just lost my thought. Oh, and then tracking all of these dates of incoming applications, review period, recommendation to the board timeframe, like.
Well, when it comes in actually to the committee, I think it would be great if the staff could maybe put on there what the relevant timelines are.
Yeah, the feedbacks,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
review.
And let me check and make sure, I guess it wouldn't even. Let me make sure this was Tuesday, not Monday, that it came in.
So we're gonna put the timeline on the application.
Each one should have its own timeline, right?
Well, it isn't gonna help it if it was on Monday, Rob, so, no, it isn't gonna happen faster. Did you hear me?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
It isn't
Yeah,
going
a
to
day isn't
happen
gonna-
faster
don't
if
worry about
it
the day.
arrives Monday.
okay. All right, so I think we're getting there.
Uh,
Put the timeline of the application.
And so there's a possibility that if someone got in an application tomorrow, it would be included in in the board's review on the 28th. Okay,
On the 28th, then if we're making decisions, are we bound by the in-person rule for voting?
No.
We can do it all remote. We've never
I've
remote.
never heard of that.
Okay, no, sorry, it's my legislative
Okay.
hat.
So Rob, this matrix that you sent out, it's in this packet. Are you asking for feedback from the board? Are you making a recommendation we adopt this?
I was making a recommendation you adopt it, is what I was suggesting. There was one item I had a question on that I didn't know if we should just not include it in the pointing schedule. Other than that, this aligns exactly with what was in the RFP.
Are you,
So,
are
I'm just
are you,
saying-
Patty, when
I'm
you say matrix, are you talking about
This.
this questionnaire?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have some volunteers, Brian and Holly, that want to go through this. It's not a requirement.
No, it's not a requirement. So you could very well leave this up to staff, and then you do have subjective ability to, when you review the actual grant applications. This is something that provides you with additional feedback from staff on each proposal, our view of the proposal. You will have access to all materials, and you could vote to ignore any recommendation the staff makes. That is what the board is empowered to do. It's a question of whether the board wants to get, and this is where I started the conversation, whether we wanted to get into the weeds or whether you wanted to trust that the scoring was going to be fair and give you enough information to move forward. Like, we're not just going to tell you this application scored this number. We're going to give you a printout of the questions that they answered. So in some ways, you could judge for yourself how you want to relate the different scoring. It's very clear in the RFP of the criteria we are using to guide the applications. This was supposed to be a tool to add some numbers to concepts and questions that we asked, and to make it an easier roadmap for you to make your final review of the applications. So that is another option. It's just,
I'm just very conscious of the fact we can't slow this ship down. We shouldn't slow the ship down. I get the need and desire to perfect things because I, type A personality, want to do that myself. But I would defer to staff personally and let you run with it, especially being on, board role, staff role. Just let me finish.
Yeah.
It might not be perfect, and it might not be, the absolute end all. I'm not criticizing your work, Rob. I'm just saying there's a certain amount of trust as board members we put in staff, and rather than hold things up, I'm going to defer to. I would recommend we defer to staff in the event board members want to review this, give feedback quickly back to Rob. Do so rather than set up a very difficult timeline process here. My understanding is you have to within 7 days make a recommendation to the board, and in our next regularly scheduled board meeting, which is the 28th, we will take up any RFPs that have come in that timeline and that have a score. We will take that up on the 28th.
Comment by the 17th. May I comment on that?
Yeah, so we had several hands that came up. Holly will start, and then Brian, then Laura.
As long as I'm not asked if I approve this, I could do that. As long as we agree that if we use it and find that we need to adjust it, we can. I mean, that's,
Agreed.
I think that's the caveat. Because you are also putting reliance on doling out millions of dollars
Understood.
on this framework. And if we find that it's not reliable in terms of some level of objectivity, in terms of some level of mechanics, then we owe it to this group and the public to fix it.
Brian?
I'm just looking for quick clarification. So the pre-construction phase of this and the pre-construction funding that's available, am I correct in that you had done the math early and shown us, Rob, about the breakdown of those funds to each CUD based on their demographics, right?
yes, based on their on and underserved addresses. Without a plan, we can address that later.
Exactly.
But yeah,
But you had that initial breakdown and you showed not only the percentages, but the dollars.
correct.
That is the construct for the pre-construction awards, and what the application process is doing is they're giving us certain information so that we can become very comfortable with authorizing that level of awards and that distribution based on that methodology, correct?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Laura?
Just for our next board meeting with these proposals, with anything that the staff is bringing forward for us to consider, I want to just say out loud, we cannot receive it the day before. I feel we have to have it at least,
It makes it hard.
it has to be at least 2 days.
Well,
Agreed.
I don't even think 2 days is enough to fairly
But I will commit to 2 days.
well, as staff, what we can do is, as the applications come in, even before they are scored, we can share them with you. So if you have time and you want to start reading them, if you want to go that in depth with each application, you have the ability to do so. The scoring, we will get done as soon as possible. Like it's my plan. Like if we were going with going with this, my plan was to try to score the first application tomorrow. To go through it, and that is kind of just, it's providing you with a guide for your review, and I will get that as soon as possible, but I will send over the application, all the materials, as soon as it arrives in our mailbox.
I want to be able to approve an application if it's appropriate at our next meeting. And so I have to have it at least.
So there's
48 hours.
so there's a cutoff. If the application comes in within 48 hours, essentially that's going to have to be moved to the next.
You couldn't do it anyway, right? I mean, you could. I guess you could.
Yeah,
I
we
guess you
we
could.
but-
Yeah, you could make
but that
it.
doesn't.
I think it's fair to say to the CUDs, if we don't get an application if there's not at least 7 days before the next board meeting, it's very likely it's going to get punted to the following
Yeah,
board.
Yes,
meeting. I
yes.
think that's
Yeah.
a fair expectation for everybody. So then everybody has access to that application for at least 7 days. Is that,
Say that again more
So-
clearly.
so if,
Less words, very succinct.
okay, if an application comes in only 7 days before a board meeting, it's not going to be addressed at the next board meeting. We may have a staff recommendation, but it's not necessarily going to be addressed at the board meeting. So really, any application, I'd like to talk to CUD world, any application that doesn't arrive before next Thursday is not going to be reviewed and approved or denied or whatever on the meeting that we're talking about having on the 28th.
And so the staff it can be scored and there can be a recommendation made, but until the board votes through a motion on that application, it's not in effect. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great.
The board has the final say on
Yes.
this.
Thank you.
Right.
So if
Right.
the board needed to punt, the
We
board
need
needed to
time
punt.
have that.
If the board had other questions, we encourage you, since you'll have the application for 7 days, like you are, there's nothing that stops us from reaching back out to application, be like, I have a question on this as an I don't think so.
So I'm hearing a further, I'm hearing further, you say that we will have them for 7 days, which is different, which is additional information.
I'm saying that you will have if I'm sending over the application, the minute it comes in, and we're not committing to approving or rejecting any application on the 28th. Anything that doesn't come in by next Thursday is not gonna,
What is
Okay.
next Thursday?
23rd. I don't,
that's 7 days
No.
from the next board meeting.
Business days, let's see, but we.
No.
need to do
Uh,
business.
the 28th is the next board meeting.
Right.
So you gotta,
So it's not next Thursday. that
One,
We're talking
two,
about, it's
three, four,
tomorrow.
5, 6, 7 is the 17th.
And by the way, just having
Oh,
the
it's
application in
Tuesday.
hand isn't enough. You need the scoring.
So Rob is saying he's gonna send that to us. We also would need the recommendation, right, from the staff. Which could not come the day before. I mean, that would,
No.
that's right.
I'd still want that at least 2 days.
No, I'll make it a priority to review all the applications.
You get
as
the
they-
48 hours plus.
All right, timelines are all screwed up here.
Yeah,
I'm not following this.
Yeah, I was
You have a meeting-
thinking the meeting was Thursday, the 30th. I thought the 2 weeks from today was the 28th, but I apparently cannot add.
Okay, I have a calendar here. We have a meeting on the 28th in the afternoon. Would it be fair that we get material on the 23rd?
Okay, so.
And
any-
then that's the cutoff. Whatever's in our packet on the 23rd is what we will consider. If it's not in the packet, it's not on the table.
And for it to be in your packet on the 23rd, 4, 5, the staff doesn't have 7 days to review anything that isn't already in hand.
We have up to 7 days. We don't need to take 7 days. If we can do it faster and get it to you, that's up to us.
You're now speaking for your working group, though. Just want to make clear, now you have a working group that you're pulling through the knothole. Yeah,
If we want, we could just do the staff scoring, since you have the final say for this round, but for the construction grants, we want to do it a little bit of a different way.
I think we just change the rules. It says, I think what we're hearing is where we were going, and I know the timeline complicated it, but is that the four of us were going to make these decisions and recommendations.
I thought we just punted on the idea of a subcommittee that was gonna review the criteria and the scorecard.
We did talk to delegating to staff to do that work.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's
Optionality
right.
wise,
Okay,
if
got
you
it.
would
Yeah,
like
I'm
to.
talking about the review of the
Right.
application. I mean, which was your idea?
Yeah, no, I was saying 7 days. If anything's not arriving on the 21st, it can't be addressed on the 28th. If we manage to, and it just leaves it up to us to score things.
That is 5 days. I'm just reminding you that if it arrives on the 21st, it's 5 days before working days.
Yeah, we're
before
trying
the
to
meeting.
keep it working.
We're trying to do 7.
That's what I'm saying. If are we doing a subcommittee for scoring, or are we just having staff score it this time around?
My
I'm not
preference,
comfortable with that.
okay, my preference is staff does the work. If Brian and Holly, you voluntarily want to participate and dig into the weeds, we want to set you up to do that, but I don't want to hold up the process.
You can score it on your own if you would like. We will provide what our score is. You will have the application in full for you to do your own,
Oh, yeah.
read it within 7 days of a board meeting.
Is there sufficient time for the working group to coordinate those elements that you wanted to coordinate? You eloquently spoke about.
So the only thing I'm thinking of right now is, so I'm gonna take the scoring thing and give feedback on it regardless, right? And I'm gonna try to do that in the next 2 days, right? And I'm gonna coordinate with Holly on that so that we give you guys one set of feedback, and if that's a tight time frame, we just gotta deal with it.
It's better than next week, in which,
Yep.
like,
So that's that, and then that'll be done. Then, as applications come in to be scored, I think, like, I want to see those applications, and I will look at the scoring thing myself as I look through them, just to remind me of criteria and checkpoints. I know staff is going to score those, and that'll be part of the recommendation to the board. And then we'll have a discussion about each one of those applications, and I'll use my notes from my own scoring thing to inform my contributions into that discussion. And that's it.
and as long as
Yes.
we're receiving those packages 5 days in advance of the meeting, that should be okay.
So I think I heard, Rob, do you think it's the right thing to do that as soon as you get one of those applications, just forward it right out to the board?
Yes.
Yeah, because then you have as much
Yes.
time as possible
Exactly.
to be able to look at it and to do your own type of review and to come prepared to
Right.
discuss.
Could I just ask one favor on each application? To Laura's earlier point, could you just say, we received it on this date, and because we received it on this date, here are the subsequent dates we need to meet to be conformed on this application?
What we promised
What we promised.
Sure.
in the RFP.
That would be great.
Well,
Sure, I can
all
do
we
this
promised so far is is a staff recommendation within 7 days, and then to consider it at the next board meeting.
So just put those dates on it.
So you're just gonna.
What's the
pin the
staff
date.
Sunday window, and when's the next board meeting where we need to discuss it?
Yes.
With a caveat that nobody can come in after the 23rd for the 28th. So on Thursday before our meeting, if we have Tuesday meetings set up, we have to have the material in the agenda on the 23rd. And I want to make a hard line on that, 23rd by noon. The packet needs to hit us on the 23rd at noon, so we have time to review.
Understood, and we all recognize the challenge was we've been trying to do meetings every week,
Understood.
getting materials as when there's 2 of us and there's so much else going on that's outside of what is happening here every week.
Madam Chair, just being super cognizant of the time and noting that Dan and I both, I have to leave at 12:15. So certainly the board could continue. I think you still have a quorum,
We
right?
need
So
to talk about your.
what do we need to talk about? I'm just asking you, Madam Chair, to kind of help.
I'm looking at the
Figure
executive
us out
session
here.
items. Do these have to be taken up today? We have 2 board members who would still have a quorum.
I don't think we need to take up with the one executive session, where's my agenda?
Well, we just did the item that was posted for 11/24.
So I don't think the confidential discussion on civil action needs to be done today. The partnership proposal can be very quick. And we can do that in 10 minutes.
Right.
And then what about the results of the design workshop? You want to,
No, we don't need to take that up either, because
you could talk to Dan about it
Yeah,
directly.
right, exactly. Yeah, in fact, I would suggest we just, we
Sorry.
strike, I'm happy to strike that, because I think I would love to talk to Dan beforehand.
The proposed decision-making timeline, that was working
We just talked
backwards.
about
Yeah, we
No,
kind of had.
No, this is the decision-making timeline is for the construction grants and what the board needs to decide before we can issue an RFP for the construction grants.
We could.
Can you put a proposal together? I'm gonna get
Yes.
my type A
Okay,
ink
thank
hat
you.
on.
100%.
Thank
I
you.
want, so let me be clear, I want staff to give a recommendation
Yes.
and not say, you know, I'm not criticizing you, Rob. If you ask for feedback, we're gonna give it because
Yeah,
that's
that's right.
what we're,
Okay.
so don't ask for that. Say, this is what we are following. This is staff's recommendation. We have heartburn on it, we want to pull it off, then we will. But I want you guys to take more of a leadership role
Got it.
in driving the ship because we can't do this by committee and get stuff done.
We got it.
Happy to
Thank
do
you.
that.
Thank you.
And I'm in
That's
support
clear.
of you guys. I'm not
No,
dissing you in any way,
Oh,
shape, or form.
I hear you, we appreciate that clarity.
But I want to give you the keys to the car and I want you to get in the car and drive.
Yeah, we got it. We will.
Okay,
Tell us where you're going.
exactly.
Yeah.
And we'll give you a list here and there.
Take the room we tell you.
And we can handle the hard knocks if we disagree.
I
So
guess.
Try to keep it what we tell you.
I always say
Exactly.
disagree quickly.
Exactly.
You don't need to admit your
All right,
words.
it is 11:30. I would like to have 10 minutes for Will because we promised to have him speak today. And then we will take up the executive session item
Right.
after that. Okay,
All right,
and conscious also of noon public comment.
yes, I'm conscious of the time and don't have too many things to discuss, but I do think it's important that the CUDs have some kind of voice during each of these meetings. First, on the behalf of all the CUDs, I'd like to thank all of you for the great work you're doing. Rob and Christine, know that you're, working very hard on all these issues, and although the CUD's top priority is having the full information and full timeline on what each grant will look like and when, we know that it takes time, and really appreciate the work that we're doing. And this past conversation was very helpful in that regard, so that we have a much clearer idea of when we'll be getting feedback on these upcoming pre-construction grant applications. So a couple of quick things. We still have a priority, and this was kind of just discussed with regard to the notice. VCUDA would like to have notice on proposals and policies as well. And I thought that, the 5 to 7 days notice for board members on the packet is something that would be useful for us as well. So we'd continue to stress that we'd like to have some kind of procedure for that so that we can develop an adequate consensus and response to proposed policies. My thinking in that regard is that for each meeting, I can prepare a more formal version of this report that I'm doing now. I can do so in writing, I can do so in presentation, I can do so with both, and would like the advice of the board on how I can best provide information for you about where the CUDs are at. Because I want to know how you'd like to receive this information and provide it accordingly. I don't want to be talking about something that's completely irrelevant, and as long as I know how you'd like to get the message of the CUDs across, that's how I'd like to do it. So moving on to a couple of specific issues. With regard to the Rdof, I'm hearing from a lot of CUDs that they are somewhat confused about how they're going to deal with this patchwork of Rdof sites that are distributed throughout their territory. The number one priority is to build out at 100/100 throughout the entire service area. And many CUDs would like to do that by building expediently through Rdof territories. So we're very, very interested in the issue of whether ARPA funding can be used for Rdof, and for the construction grants, what that would look like for what kind of requirements for partnerships would be in place, and how CUDs will be able to build 2 sites that have Rdof bids already. Because frankly, these sites are not falling within 100/100 service a lot of the time. CUDs are looking to build through those. I don't know if that's universal, but I've heard from many CUDs this is a priority to know about. At our VCUDA meeting on Monday, we authorized, and I know the VCBB staff is very, very busy, but we did authorize VCBB staff to start exploring bulk purchasing for material. And this is something that is a priority for the CUDs. I know that this may take some time as well. And while we're seeing what kind of offer can be generated through the centralized means, the VCBB, all CUDs are also exploring their own purchasing options right now. So, we're not dead set on a centralized purchasing, but should that be the best avenue, we'd be happy to work with the VCBB to make that arrangement. We've also bandied the idea around of bulk purchasing through VCUDA. However, since VCUDA funding at this point would largely be coming through the VCBB, we've kind of put that idea on the back burner for now, since it would be adding a middleman to the process. So that's something that we'd like to continue to work with the VCBB on. On the issue of affordability, the CUDs very much appreciated Ms. Grossner's presentation last time. All CUDs are completely committed to the issue of affordability. There's some divergence still on what that looks like in terms of planning and policy for affordability. But again, we're looking forward to see what kind of requirements are put forward by the board and working with you on those. Also on the VCUDA front, shared services is something that CUDs are starting to express a lot more interest in. We're starting to explore financial controls. CUDs do want to maintain a large degree of autonomy over their bookkeeping. However, there is a strong desire expressed for some more professional support to be given, especially in light of audits that may be upcoming. So this is something that within the month, we're going to be proposing to the CUDs to have some kind of united service that can at least support the bookkeeping efforts already in place. So in the interest of time, I'll conclude there, but if anyone has any questions about where the CUDs are at or anything that I can be looking into to help support your mission for the CUDs, please. Laura.
First, I want to, is it okay?
Yes,
Thank you. That was terrific. And it would be great if we can to receive, I would love to receive, an update, whatever the CUDs, in addition to what we may ask of them, but whatever the CUDs want us to know by CUD at every meeting. I would in writing, maybe in advance of the meeting, are there things that you want us to know?
Sure.
And then with the bulk purchasing and any other shared services, I want to make sure that between VCUDA and the VCBB, that we have a relationship that is, how can we best serve? If you find that you need, that there's a number of CUDs that are looking for a certain type of service, or that you are coming to us to see how we might be able first,
Of course.
to.
Yeah, of course. I mean, VCUDA is looking at these shared services, and when we do try to acquire them, we'll be going through the board.
Right.
I'm going to try to keep you very abreast of what we're doing here, since we'll also be applying for funding to make this happen. Does that? With regard to the first part of your comment, I am thinking that if I do have some kind of system to provide a regular report for each meeting, it would be coming in advance, depending on how much notice I have on, what's going to be considered at the meeting. And it would also have specific remarks from specific CUDs indicating which CUD is taking which view, depending on the circumstances. Of course, I'm always trying to build consensus and present a united front, as I have today. But there may be cases when individual CUDs' views have to be voiced, whether for geographic issues or financial or what may.
So one piece of information that I just remembered is on a call earlier this week with folks in Maryland. They are using ARPA funds to supplement Rdof addresses to get them built out sooner. So that leads me to believe. So in Maryland, part of the funding that they're using ARPA funds to give Rdof when there's additional funds to make the build out happen faster. That makes me believe that
Right there.
that answers the
Yeah, but we
question.
need to.
But we want to confirm
You're
it.
gonna
We want to
confirm
confirm
where
it,
it's
but
validated.
I wanted to share that to try to reduce
Rob's
any
word's
panic.
good enough for me.
Whatever you heard.
Subject to change.
I just want to
Maryland's
say
doing
that is
it.
what
Why
I
can't
heard, but it needs to be confirmed.
Check.
And the
So
presenter
don't
was
panic.
Rdof.
So actually, no, but I think an important point. So when we ask the question to finance and management, that we have the program from Maryland.
Yep.
That they're doing it in hand when we
Yep,
ask the
okay.
question. So it's
Gotcha.
happening in Maryland here.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
ask
we had a-
Maryland if they got legal.
Yes.
We had a conversation with the White House broadband person and a few other states and didn't get to, they weren't able to speak up. We're gonna do it again, but that was one of the states that was on that, and that's where that happened. So we can look into that.
It's okay.
And we've So we definitely need confirmation on this from a legal perspective here in Vermont, but the CUDs are moving ahead with this assumption that RDOF sites are going to be incorporated into the network. It's what's most expedient. Sorry, Laura, did you have a comment? Oh, just a thumbs up. Okay, great. That being said, there is a concern, and I know that this is part of the process right now. I'm not going to try to rush it, but there is a concern about how those sites and other sites that are considered served, based on the data that are clearly not, will be incorporated into the amount of premises that a CUD applies for. So we're very anxious to see how that data will be incorporated in light of RDOF, in light of locations that may be considered served that the CUDs, know to be otherwise.
Incorporated how? This goes back to our.
Incorporate into the premises in the application for construction.
I think this goes to the actual formula, how we're going to distribute construction funds.
Yes.
And I would certainly welcome Bakuda coming to us with an idea that
Exactly.
they suggest.
Right, yeah, so
We have to figure it out in terms of other, and actually I put that out there to the world of other eligible providers. How do you suggest it? Give us feedback.
yeah, and we will be coming with this because many CUDs are concerned that the number of premises they'll be able to apply for successfully is much lower than what they'll actually have to serve. So this will be going into that conversation, and I just want to make it clear that it is a top priority for the
This
CUDs.
does, though, go to our baseline data discussion.
Exactly.
And is, critical. And so while we've already booked our meeting for the 28th and it's busy with, I would hope that we would set aside a meeting to get this done, this baseline discussion.
Yeah, and we want CUD input into that baseline discussion because we can't waste cycle time arguing over data.
Yeah.
We will to some degree, but it can't be the most wasted cycle. So we really want your input up front so that we can try to land something that everyone is willing to accept.
Yeah, that's great. And I can try to put together a report for CUD perspective specifically on this issue. I don't know, how conducive it'll be. Hopefully very. But I can talk to all the CUDs about data issues specifically and see where we stand and what we want these baselines to be.
And I'd also like their input in what role do they want to play as the kind of verifiers on the ground in their territory when there are gaps identified between the baseline data and what people are observing on the ground, because there's going to be that.
That is a big question.
Yeah, and do they want to, I would love for them to play the role of being like, we can reconcile gaps in the data because we know the reality on the ground and we can bring that back to whatever the baseline data is telling us.
And it's not going to change the baseline. It's just going to be a reported variable.
It's a bit of a separate issue down the road, but I can incorporate that into my conversations.
Just looking ahead.
So for our group and for Will's benefit, our meeting after the 28th is October, what? 4th.
So I'll have to add the 28th back in.
So
And it's anticipated that this meeting will,
Is that the only Monday we're doing?
I think we
even
switched.
That was
know.
we
Mondays.
switched to
Has
Mondays.
that been sent
We
out?
switched to Mondays every other week.
The 28th has not been sent out. I will get that sent out since it was originally
And I don't
canceled.
have the 4th either. Is that sent out yet?
That was sent out.
So starting on the 4th, are we Monday afternoons every other week going forward?
That was
Yes.
the plan.
Great.
But one other thing that came up earlier in the meeting is just hearing how HUDs are coordinating or not coordinating or attempting to coordinate with RDOF partners.
yes. Right. I meant to address this. This is something that I don't have the full picture on yet. It's something I'm going to have to talk to the CUDs about because I'm not going to represent them when I don't know them. So I know that CUDs are evaluating where the RDOF partners are. I don't know exactly where each of them are at in terms of actually, making conversation with them and figuring out what's going to happen. So I will evaluate that and see what I can report back to the board. In the interest of time, are there any other questions?
Just last comment, Will, just going forward, having your presence here is going to be great and helpful. It would be really helpful to me when you're giving us information, if you can be very specific about when you are speaking on behalf of all the CUDs and you have consensus versus when you are speaking on behalf of some CUDs or some feedback that is not necessarily consensus based. just making that distinction will help everything.
Yes,
And I do note that you did try to do that today.
Yeah,
By
that's great.
saying,
I'm consistently trying to do that, and hopefully as the CUDs learn more about what I'm doing here, and I'll be able to get more consistent feedback. But also I'll continue to, when I'm making reports, I may be able to even say which CUDs are voicing which views with permission. So I'll continue to try and work on that and improve that relationship.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Some things can be unique, some things cannot. Like there's going to be how we count.
Of
It's going
course.
to be, so to the extent that they can come forward with some consensus thinking.
All right, any other comments, questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving me the time.
All right, I'd like to take the time to move to executive session. We'll take up the one item in executive session. We have a motion to go into executive session.
so moved.
Second, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Something I need to
You need
take
to
off.
step
Into the room, and we will, for everybody online, we will be stopping the video and the audio at this time. We,
Wait outside. We can come and get you.
Right.
yeah,
Well, I think I may just come back on virtually for public comments.
the public comment is at noon.
At noon
Correct.
sharp?
So we will be back on, what we don't use for executive session, maybe we use for a very brief break.
Yes.
So we'll be back on at noon. So we're just turning
Thank
off
you,
the video and
everyone.
audio now. Okay. On video, okay.
All right, we are
We are
out of
back.
executive session at 12:02. No action was taken in executive session. We will now turn it over to public comment.
But there's no one left in the room here. Is there anybody online that would like to speak? We're keeping it to 3 minutes, and then if the board has additional questions.
Yeah, FX.
FX has a question. Unmute yourself, FX.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Good work this morning. I just thought I would comment quickly on the issue of the mapping and all that. Would it be okay if I shared something?
Sure.
Sure, I think you have the ability. If you don't,
Yeah.
see if you have the ability first, and then I might have to change your status, but yeah, see if you have it first. If it doesn't work, let me know and I'll press a button to see if it works.
And pausing is 3 minutes, so while we look for the technical.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I'm not, oh, wait a second. Yep, here it is. Okay, terrific. Great. Okay, that should be coming up. Come on.
Seeing the spreadsheet.
You'll see the spreadsheet trends video.
Okay, good. Okay, excellent. So this all is some work that I did in support of the equal access to broadband work. I basically took layers from the state map. I created a layer where I more carefully defined what I thought the cable services areas were. And I took also the layer for the phone companies because I needed to know by each site address what the state thought the service level was, who the CUD was, what the status would be if they were in EC fiber territory, who the phone company would be, who the cable company would be, and whether or not there was a fiber company. And some of the things that I can do with this now is I can see in terms of the lit customers in EC fiber towns, how many the state thinks get 10-1, how many the state thinks get 100-100, how many get 25-3. I can also look at situations where we've overbuilt charter in a few places, and I can split that out and see these things. So this is all very easy to do with the availability of the state data, and I think that let's see here.
You have 20 seconds, FX.
Yeah, I'm done.
You're just letting us know.
Do you have a concluding point?
Yeah, FX, so this is exactly what we're envisioning as a board to help us drive decision-making. So this is great. I'm psyched that you guys have this data. Any chance we could get you to do this on behalf of the whole state?
Okay.
Be frozen or just really quiet? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Are you there, FX?
I'm not sure what happened there or how much of what I said you heard. I just was basically.
We volunteered you to do
illustrate-
this for the entire state.
Pardon me?
We volunteered for you to do this for the entire state.
I've already done it.
You have beyond EC fiber territory?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Oh, look at
So the
that.
GIS administrator we hire would do something similar to this.
Are
Yeah.
you willing to
this.
share this table, FX?
I don't know, I'd have to talk to the chairman of the board of equal access to broadband.
I think she would consider it.
She's very reasonable.
Yeah, but I can go through how I did this with, you know, whoever you hire for the GIS. It's pretty straightforward. The one thing that I had to do was make my own layer for the cable companies, because the you know, the information didn't exactly match up with my perception of what those boundaries were, and I wanted to be able